Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here very early today. I know that for a lot of you, just flew in from different parts of the GCC, and some of you actually further away, so I just wanted to thank everyone. Fortunately or unfortunately, we're experiencing traffic around the area, so we're expecting people to sort of walk in, but we didn't want to delay it any further because we have sort of a jam-packed session. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Arij Al-Shakar from the Bahrain Development Bank and also part of the Al-Waha Venture Capital Fund of Funds. So we're happy to host our 5th edition of this of Invested, which started out just to help support and spur venture capital investing in Bahrain and across the region, bringing together VCs, investors, angel investors, and those just interested in this space and wanting to learn more. So today's going to be a jam-packed program with people speaking about their experiences within this space, what they've done, and how they've actually come into venture investing. But before we go into that, I would like to introduce Buthaina Amin from the Bahrain Economic Development Board. We'll just give you a little bit about what we have to offer here in Bahrain.
Thank you, Arij, for that kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for making the time to be with us here today. As Arij mentioned, welcome to Invested, another edition designed by Bahrain Development Bank to help support entrepreneurs in setting up their businesses here in Bahrain, and also supported by Startup Bahrain, which is an initiative to help develop Bahrain into a startup hub for the region. My name is Buthaina Amin. I'm a director at the Bahrain Economic Development Board, and our mandate is having the overall responsibility of attracting FDI into the kingdom. We also like to be the first point of contact for any investors or companies looking at Bahrain and trying to understand the landscape and the markets. Our process is threefold. And firstly, it's with providing advice and supporting you in the decision-making process. We also like to be facilitators to help make the necessary introductions that actually can perhaps actually result in various forms of funding. And finally, aftercare. For us, it's very important that we not only get companies that come to Bahrain and set up, but that they're happy, that they thrive, and if they would like to, and if they can do, of course, they can scale and grow their businesses in the Kingdom of Bahrain or even further afield, wider into the region. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. There's going to be quite a few representatives here with you throughout the day, and I hope you enjoy the program. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Buthaina. I'm going to try not to trip. I recently hurt my ankle, so I don't want to hurt myself again. Well, thank you, Buthaina, for that. And like she said, today is going to be all about learning about venture investing, but also how Bahrain can actually help support you and your portfolio companies if any of you are actually exploring the region. Next up is Philip Bahoshi from Magnet. He's the founder of Magnet. A lot of people probably use the platform, and he sends a lot of great news, and a lot of you are in the news that he presents, but he's going to give you a little bit about the region.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm not going to bore you too much with all the data and numbers because hopefully you get our reports. But what I was asked to do was just give a little bit of context on what's happening from a numbers perspective here in the region. And we aggregate, I'm going to give you a couple of your own investors. So we aggregate now 180 different institutions every quarter to ask them for their investments in this space. And that can be ranging from angel groups, corporates, PEs, family offices. And this year alone, there's been 189 different institutions who have made investments in startups across 24% of which have come from outside of the region. But most interestingly, and this is basically fresh from this morning, 54% had never previously made investments in startups. So there is a continued and growing interest in the venture space and startups. When it looks at the numbers, so last year there was $800 million invested in MENA-based companies. And as of this morning, thanks to Trucker that was announced yesterday, there was $581 million of investment, with about a month and a half left. Now, last year, $200 million was invested in Kareem, so that's a little bit of a gap that needs to be filled. And we think that we'll get to the point where we'll hit that number. But the question becomes, how does that compare to the rest of the world? And we keep looking at data that comes out of companies like CB Insights and PitchBook, what's happening in Asia, what's happening in the US. And the most comparable country that we could find was that the total amount of investment in the whole of MENA, and somebody was asking me, how do you define MENA? We have 18 countries that we cover from North Africa and the Middle East, is the same as the amount that was invested in the Netherlands last year, and just under the total amount of investment in Spain. Now, Sharif from 500 told me you can't compare it to the US and Southeast Asia. It's incomparable to compare the two. But when you look at that and put that into context, there's still a huge amount of investment opportunity. And Walid Mansour always says that there's a complete disconnect between the demand and supply for capital in this space. And I genuinely believe that, because one of the things that we see is that at every stage, startups are complaining that there isn't enough capital. And one of the things that I think people forget when they speak to these founders is that there are more and more founders coming into this space than ever before, and a need for capital not only at the later stage as these companies grow, but also at the early stage. But what we have seen is that there is more individual activity. Last year there was 430 startups that received investment, and already this year there's 415, so we expect to surpass that. And when you start looking at where this is happening, you're beginning to see some interesting shifts. Egypt, for the first time in our recording, surpasses all other countries with regards to the total number of investments that have taken place. And I think that's credit to the fact that you're seeing that large population having young, inspired entrepreneurs get investment, especially at the seed stage. But Saudi Arabia is now third, both by number of deals and amount of investment, for startups. And having just been there, the initiatives that are taking place really look to spur on entrepreneurship, and we expect that trend to continue. What does that create? That creates a very interesting dynamic. I'm very fortunate with Magnet to be able to speak with governments, different institutions, investors, corporates, etc., across the region. And you're beginning to see this somewhat healthy but unhealthy competition take place, whereby governments are trying to become this hub. My 2 cents on this is that to see entrepreneurship grow across the region, these barriers need to be broken. And it's not about having a hub in each of these countries, it's about companies being able to scale into each of those geographies. And when you see the success of the Kareems and the Souks and etc., for me, it's not about how can you create a Bahrain hub, how can you make a Saudi hub, a UAE, Dubai, Abu Dhabi hub. It's how can you encourage both entrepreneurs in those countries, but also from outside of those countries to scale into those countries. And that, from a venture perspective, will mean that they become more interesting for investment, but also for exits. I think that the key thing that we'll see when we bring out our report at the end of the year is we've had 23 exits to date. That's more than any previous year on record. And that will probably be a record that will look to move into next year, where you're seeing more mergers and acquisitions to create larger companies, more international interest. I think we as a company have seen more interest from Asian investors than anywhere else in the globe on MENA startups, both by VCs looking to invest in Middle East startups, but also portfolio companies looking to merge. And I think that's the opportunity that we'll continue to see grow. So with that said, we've also noted that there's about 2 billion announced capital of investment to be deployed, whether that's through Mubadala Ventures, Al-Waha, SVC, many fund of funds that are taking place. But I think one of the things that we would like to see is that the actual infrastructure continues to grow as opposed to the hype that you see in the media, so that the announcements will actually see an acceleration in the amount of investment, and that the median investment size this year, excluding Souk and Kareem, was 2.1 million, but the median was 0.2. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next year. I think it's been a step change growth over the last 3 to 4 years, but if we want to see this continue growing, it'll be great to see how we can garner more international investment in this space. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Philip. I guess that sort of just reiterates how, settings like this and discussions like this can help, maybe answer some of the questions Philip was bringing up as to, how many more startups are coming into the space, how many more investors are actually going to be able to fund these startups and where the gap lies, and whether there is enough funding or not enough funding. I think this is a good opportunity for all of us to have these discussions. Before we have our first discussion, I wanted to just take a moment to thank the Bahrain Economic Development Board and Startup Bahrain for continuously supporting this. They've supported us from the beginning. It just is very warming to see how many people have grown. I think you'll be able to meet a few people that have been coming to us from the first edition of this, and how some of them weren't investing in tech, now are investing in tech, and how it continuously becomes a good opportunity for everybody from the region to come together and have this discussion. And now our region is growing wider. I can see a lot of people that are here from outside MENA. So I mean, we're gonna need a few minutes because I need to get chairs up here, but just give us 2 minutes and we'll be starting up with Fahad. Yeah, great. All right, so now the setup is ready. I'd like to bring up to the stage Fahad Al-Sharah, who's the founder of Tech Invest, and who will be joining me for our first panel session of today. Yeah. Thanks, Fahad, for joining us. And I mean, you're very well known within the tech ecosystem and across the region, but for those of you who don't know Fahad, maybe Fahad can give us a few minutes about yourself, your background, and why technology investing.
Well, thank you, Arij, and thank you, Waha and BDB and the EDB. You know, Bahrain is distinguishing itself, you know, by these amazing initiatives you guys have here, and you know, putting your money where, you know, it should be right now is what makes you really a very important player in the venture capital regional ecosystem. We at Tech Invest basically are an investment banking advisor for people that want to raise money from the region, mostly focused on Silicon Valley opportunities, whether it's funds or direct investments. Personally, I've invested in a few startups in the region, and we continue to advise funds and fund of funds on how to approach the investment space in Silicon Valley. I like to focus on Silicon Valley for two reasons. Number one, because I don't speak Chinese or speak Indian or something, so I want to focus on a language that I'm comfortable with. So, and number two, there's just so much deal flow going on over there that it's enough for everybody to do well. And having the opportunity to be there early can help us also advise these companies how to come here and launch on the commercial side and commercialize their tech, not just raise money, and also, you know, cross investments with other earlier stage, and we've done that too. So we look at some early stage companies here, and we immediately identify them for the US investors who are looking to expand maybe through an M&A. And so that has been also active recently.
Great, thanks, Fahad. I mean, I know you're probably one of the more, like, or I would say earlier investors in this space and into venture. So, I mean, you know, Philip was talking a little bit about, you know, how much money's been going into that. So, you know, how would you compare? You know, a lot of people will argue and say, you know, why are you looking at Silicon Valley? Why aren't you putting your money here in the region? There's always this argument. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about why you started there and why you now are investing in the region and what sort of helped switch that for you.
Okay, good. Well, Philip did a good job with explaining the size, and he said, you know, we're almost the size of Spain, right? And so there's just, and then what was it? The average ticket size, I think, was 200,000, right? So, I mean, it's growing. And it's actually growing, and from what I heard, I was impressed with some of the numbers because, it is exponential. You know, I mean, it's really just it's taken off, and you know, with successful VCs like Beko, I think Amir is here, and you know, their focus early on Kareem, and you know, the landscape is changing for sure. And as you said, you know, I've started about 20 years ago. There was no ecosystem here, so it wasn't by choice. There was nothing here, and we liked the space, and so we wanted to start early. And now the importance of venture capital is becoming important, and governments are doing some smart initiatives like Waha Fund, you know, and you're actively, you know, helping this grow, this region in terms of focused on tech grow. And listen, there's really two things that make an ecosystem work. People throw the word ecosystem around like it's real, you know. Silicon Valley is an ecosystem, maybe Boston. India, and China, because of what they've done recently, and I'm going to get to that. But even London and even Europe is struggling with building an ecosystem. Over here in the region, we're struggling with building the ecosystem, right? But it needs really two things for it to work on that level. Number one is money, and number two is a talent pool, right? Where are you going to get the people from? With the creatives, right? People that challenge and want to fix the mistakes that are happening from older tech. You know, innovation and the desire to build the next big thing. That comes from talent. And the Middle East, you know, still doesn't have a top 1,000 school in computer science. There are no coding academies at par with, you know, what's going on in Silicon Valley. And you know, and besides, you don't have to be in Stanford or Harvard or, you know, or Carnegie Mellon or Imperial but in India, for example, you know, they have IIT, and IIT is a great school, and all the big successful CEOs in Silicon Valley who are of Indian origin went to IIT. So you can see the correlation. You know, a great school makes great leadership and, you know, great innovation. China has been changed its whole curriculum. You know, China went and changed early education in schools, I mean, and you know, changed the memorization and, you know, so just problems in math and changed it into critical problem solving because they want to breed a new level of AI thinkers, you know, and people that really understand what's happening now. You know, quantum is coming, and, you know, real deep tech. You know, the computers today, you know, Google and IBM are figuring out who's got the better, you know, quantum processing tech. But eventually, it's going to be coders and innovators and software architects that are going to build the tools we're going to use in our lives. With 5G coming and AR and blockchain, the game is changing. Everything we know today is going to be changed in 2 years, you know, quite, you know, materially, because, you know, it's like this reminds me a lot of 2007, you know, just before the smartphone and 3G. Look at our lives, it changed. Ride sharing, the gig economy, you know, online payments and all that, you know, $1 trillion companies popped up because of that. And now we're in that inflection again, you know, and so we need really smart people that have innovative, you know, ideas. And that really is the problem we have here. And so to solve it, you got to invest in computer science schools, in coding schools, in data science schools. Morocco actually has a good data science school, the only one in the region that's at that scale. And so we wanted to hire some data scientists for our company, one of the companies we invested in, and we went all over. Of course, we went to Jordan, Egypt, and stuff. And funny enough, we discovered that the best data scientists are coming fresh out of college are in Morocco. So it's happening here and there, you know, and then that's the education part, and that's the China, you know, why China's winning.
But, you know, you were saying that you've recently, or you have, you know, invested in companies in the region. So, you know, what made you, you know, if there's all these gaps that are there, what made you choose these companies, and what sort of helped you identify? Because, you know, you're seeing great companies out of Silicon Valley, they have talent, the ecosystem is a lot more mature. So what helped you decide to put money in these companies?
Okay, Okay, well, you're telling me to pitch the companies I invested in.
No,
so
I mean,
I
just,
am.
you, I mean, you
No,
can
no,
pitch them, but
I
like, at
will,
least
why
tell
not?
us why these companies.
It is an investment forum, so I'm going to pitch the companies I invested in. So, Coded. I invested in Coded because Coded solves the problem of not having enough coders. And I did it because I understand that there is a shortage of coders in the planet, right? Silicon Valley has a problem of hiring good coders. That's why people fresh out of college are getting $100,000 and $200,000 to do things just because they know how to code. They might not be good or they don't have the expertise, but companies are desperate to hire coders, you know? and I think coding is important. And just to solve a problem, as I said, of the lack of talent. And so that was one. And there's a lot of different coding initiatives. I like the one I invested in because they have a combination of online and offline approach, which is necessary. So they do have an offline, which is just a regular brick and mortar institute, but they also have, and we have almost 210,000 people on our online platform, mostly from North Africa, Arabs. And so that's where I think it's good to focus on. Magnet, I think, is a good company because we need to focus on data. There's not enough data here, and I think, he mentioned, Philip mentioned PitchBook. These are things we read daily, right? So we need a regional PitchBook, even something better. And so maybe Magnet can do that. And so you got to look at where there is a problem that immediately, you can identify a real problem in what's missing in the ecosystem and focus there. And I'm not picking on anything here, but a lot of startups here are just very stupid knockoffs and mimics and Me Too's of crap, okay? I mean, this is the 10th app that delivers coffee. Come on, man, So, I mean, that is the sad part, and then when you look at people, like, again, I'm going to choose Beko. They just raised $100 million, right? I think it's going to be extremely challenging to figure out where to put that money to work because, how are you going to identify business plans that are really going to grow and scale with all the, challenges here? With those two challenges, I said, hiring talent, and number two, making sure that Series D, or, when the company grows to 100 and 300 and 500 million, where's the money going to come from? We have one good case study, Kareem, right? I think Kareem is a good case study. I'm not sure about the other one, but Kareem is definitely, it grew organically and scaled, but there's only one, right? Kuwait had several, smaller exits, whether it's Carriage or Talabat or For Sale, or Coded is a Kuwaiti company, and Just Clean. There are there, but and then, once you hit the Series A and B, there's no continuity of capital in the region either. So initiatives like you, Waha, supporting these VCs is actually very good because that's the first problem identified, capital. So you need capital and talent. But there is a lot to do in this region. I mean, this region has, 400 million people. He said MENA is only 19 countries, right? So the 19, whatever, the other countries you don't care about, it's okay, neither does Trump. But the point here is that we have a lot of potential. And, funny enough, the largest growing tech economy in the region is Israel. And 4% of their workforce are Palestinians, and they'd rather not see Palestinians work, but they have to hire them because the economy is not going to grow unless they hire Palestinians and Palestinian coders specifically. So now they're going full throttle to train Palestinians on coding because they anticipate, and these are their numbers, that in the next 5 years, 20% of the Israeli tech workforce in coding is going to be Palestinians, right? And so
But would you say, Fahed, that Amir's back, so maybe he can defend. He kind of said something about your fund. But anyways, so you're saying 100 million Beko, where are they going to put the money? So we have a lot of people in this room that are actually focusing on MENA or looking to invest in MENA. So is there hope, or are we going to go there, or should people go to Silicon Valley and forget the region?
Yeah, No, I actually said Beko did a great job in building companies in the region.
He's
And-
defending you now. Right? You missed it when you were outside.
No, and I said Beko actually successfully just raised 100 million, and I think they're going to have a challenge to figure out where to allocate that money because of the two problems I identified, the lack of talent and the lack of innovation. But I did choose them, I said, out of all the others because of their, they have a good exit with Kareem. Now, the region has a lot of potential. And I think the larger institutional investors really just woke up, okay? And if you remember last year in Milken, I challenged somebody, I said, where's the money, right? You put a lot of money in Silicon Valley, you put a lot of money in India, you haven't put $1 in the region, you talk the talk, but you don't do anything. And so now, they both launched regional funds and fund of funds, right? So the Chinese, I'm going to give this example. China realized that they're way backwards in terms of innovations in high tech, which is, AI, robotics, and data. And like real smart data analytics, right? Like predictive data and stuff, And then all that together will give you like general AI, which is where everyone wants to go, when the machine thinks better than you, right? And it's happening, but anyway. So the Chinese wanted to win this war, okay? And they only can do it through innovation. They can't keep reverse engineering US tech or, they have to innovate themselves. And so they took a decision in 2017 to allocate money into this. And so they put about, I think there's 1,700 incubators, okay? And each incubator, the government gave them 380 billion spread around these, okay? With a GP-LP sort of agreement that was spread all over China. And the big guys in the party were like, this is a third of a trillion, and what are we gonna do? So they knew that. There's like 100 billion will probably be wasted on corruption. 100 billion will be stupid knockoffs and Me Too's. But 100 billion is gonna be what's gonna make us win. And today China is #1 in AI, right? And robotics. I mean, the stuff they have is ridiculous. Even the new coffee shop, Luckin and all that, right? The new Starbucks they have, it's all robot, it's all, the barista, everything is AI-based, app-based, and that's the cute part. But now imagine what that's gonna do to industrialization, et cetera. So money is #1. We need much more money in the region.
So we need them to invest in the region.
Of course.
Okay. I'm conscious of time, right? So I want to get the audience engaged a little bit. But I wanted to, before we open it up for questions, I wanted to ask you, because you've been doing this for 20 years, what would you say are the top 3 factors people should look at when they're looking at investing in the region? So people will argue that valuations are a little bit overinflated, but then people that are outside the region are saying, oh my God, this is such a great opportunity because the valuations here are much lower than what they see in China or potentially in the US. So if you could say top 3 factors that people should keep in mind when they're looking at investing in the region and sort of, how you came about these factors.
The region does have a lot of potential. And the biggest thing we have here is the youth and the number of, the percentage of people who are below 30. It's higher than any part of the world. And number 2, Japan and North Europe, they're struggling with, senior citizens who are, and less young people. And so like, this is an opportunity to come here because the young people are early adopters and, the smartphone penetration is highest here. And so these are key indicators of why this is a great place to invest. And money is starting to accumulate. It's still small, but I mean, it's a good beginning. And on the valuation side, again, I'm going to use Kareem as an example. If Kareem was in Asia, it would probably be worth, the valuation would have been higher. Probably would have been like a 5-6 billion valuation. If it was in Europe, probably would have been 8 to 10 billion. If it was in America, it would have been probably a $15 billion company, or maybe more, based on their numbers and metrics. But the reason it was such a low valuation is because it's in the region. And the region suffers from a lack of exit opportunity. Where are you going to exit? Kareem can't go public in any other markets in the Middle East because our markets are old. And they don't understand. They're like, I need 3 years of profitable, balance sheet. Like, what decade is this. You know, Amazon went profitable 2015. It's $1 trillion company. It only had 3% of the market share, you know? So they don't get it. That's the problem. We don't have an exit. We don't have a method for people to exit. People can only exit through a merger or an acquisition, which limits, and that's why the valuations are low on the larger scale. On the earlier stage, you know, again, you know, what's the problem these people are trying to solve? Like a Bahraini company here, very interesting. It's called Skiplino, okay? It's a Bahraini startup. Now it's in 100 countries, okay? All it's helped people is helps people skip lines. So when you go to the bank or go to the telco or go to any places where you take a number and wait, you don't have to do that anymore. The app does that. You just walk in and walk out. Very simple. They solved it. The code is written here in Bahrain, you know, and that's a good company. And so you need to identify problems that make life better. You know, Google has this thing. It's called the toothbrush test, right? Why they invest. When they said, why did you write such a big check into Uber in 2013? I think it was Larry Page. He said the toothbrush test is 3 things. Number 1, how easy it is to use. You know, it's so simple. Number 2, how many times can you use it a day? At least twice. And number 3, it makes your life much better, right? And that's the example for Uber. Like, it does make your life better. You use it twice at least to go and come back. And finally, it's so easy. It's 2 clicks. And so you need to make life better for people to get it and people to come and want to invest with you. So Skiplino, for example, makes life better. It's easy and it's quick. And I'm sure there's a lot of other younger people, a lot of other young people who have ideas that are worth investing with because they are trying to solve problems and identify how to make life better. But again, some of the problems is that people don't understand their value of the company. You know, they want to come and talk to you about all the hype, and it's not about, no one is here to entertain themselves. People are here to invest and make money. And we know this is a very, you know, tough area to invest in. It's called venture capital. And venture is short for adventure, right? And when you go on an adventure, it can be a nice day. You can go and break your leg and you can be eaten by a shark or something, but, you know, it's an adventure. And so the same thing is happening with capital. It's not real estate, right? Real is real. You know, fixed income, it's clear. Adventure capital is, you don't know. And so you're taking a risk anyway. So you want to take a risk that's smart, and you want to take a risk that's real, and you want to meet people that know their value. And some people either overvalue themselves because they compare themselves to a company in California. And as you know, somebody said, you can't compare us to California. You just can't. Think Sharif from 500. And number 2, or they don't know their worth, and they start, you know, undermining their value, et cetera, because they're desperate for cash and they can't. And that is the challenge, actually. No, like, answer what to do. They just, you know, as the system grows and matures, it will figure out themselves, you know, exactly how much everyone is worth, really.
Just before I open it up, sorry guys, I'm taking over your time. But, you know, would you say for someone who's just brand new, looking at venture, has some money, you know, and maybe talk about like maybe the first check you wrote or how you got into this, would you say, oh, we should give it to Beko, for example, to invest it for us? Or to Shuruq or some of the VCs here. We're not just going to pick on any of today. Or maybe like a venture souk type, you know, where they have sort of, you know, a different type of setup, where, or do they just go out and do the first angel check? Like somebody who's interested. Which one would you choose?
Look, if you're an angel investor, good luck, because, you know, look, there's only certain time and powers that someone can have during the day to figure out what's happening. And you need to have access, you need to see all the deal flow, and you have to have access to the CEO and the founder. And then you have to have judgment. And these are not easy things to have. I personally have been burnt through trying to figure out myself, and I've learned the hard way how to invest. And, you know, people say, how do you do it? You know, how do you get the right decision? You know, right decisions is based on a lot of wrong decisions, right? And that's called experience. And so I would not go on my own. If you want to venture into venture capital, I think you should invest via a VC fund, the funds you like, you know, whatever criteria you have. Again, Beko, because I grew up with Danny and Amir as a friend, and I like them a lot. And, you know, Danny and I were one of the first people to do startups here. I started Ajib.com, he started Bait.com. That's 20 years ago in Dubai Internet City. It doesn't even exist, I think, anymore. think it's a highway to the palm now. But anyway, so the struggle, that guy knows what's going on. And he's been up and down, up and down, up and down. And Kareem is a good exit. So maybe I would start there. But now I think they're too big for small checks, right? And then I would go find the next Beko. Who was Beko 5 years ago? Who was Beko 6 years ago? You know what I mean? I would do that. I wouldn't go venture directly without knowing what I'm doing, because you're going to lose your money. And you're going to say, oh, VC sucks. But VC doesn't suck, because the top 6 companies in market cap came out of VC. And they're trillion-dollar companies. So VC makes winners. You just got to be careful. And then angel investors that want to write a small check to support 1 or 2 companies, I think take your time. Take your time, read, understand. Don't jump because you think the idea is great. Take your time, understand what's happening.
Or maybe grab you during the break and ask your secrets.
I don't know. I'm too old to be optimistic. I'm like, oh, forget about this guy. He doesn't know what he's doing. So don't ask me.
No, ask him. All right, maybe we can open it up for some questions. I see Rabil up here, dying to ask a question. You've been waving your hand. Just wait for the mic if you don't mind. Introduce yourself, because not everybody knows you.
Thank you, Reed, for putting me on the spot. I'm actually from Pakistan, and I manage a fund which is focused on Pakistan. And one of the things we are taught or told is learn from others. Venture capital is about avoiding mistakes that have been made, etc. How do I put a framework around that? How does that learning or that bridge building, how did it happen for you between the Valley and the MENA region? How can we, who are even further behind in the ecosystem, kind of leverage some of those learnings and try to kind of hopefully set up a better ecosystem in a way other than without having those learnings? So I'm just curious, is there even a way of thinking about this? Because obviously one element is just the same founders that might be coming back, they might be bringing capital, experience, so backing the same people to set up the new companies, that might be one way. But are there other ways of facilitating this?
Silicon Valley is successful because a lot of the guys give back to the community through either seeding, investing, sitting on people's boards, advising, and it's that culture they have, right? And everybody supports everybody, and when you look at the investments and look at the seed guys, you'll be amazed. Like, who seeded Uber? It's everybody that was relevant. How did they know? Well, they didn't. Right? They took a bet on a smart founder and a smart idea and advised them to win, right? And that's another thing and that we need here. Because of the lack of exits, there's not a lot of stars here that can educate people on how to do it. Same thing with Pakistan, right? I think Mudassir is Pakistani, and he's a smart guy. I would pick his brain, and I'm sure there's other people like him. And that's a good point that you mentioned towards the end. You kind of answered that question. But again, the most important thing is capital, right? And the government desire to support. And now I see it happening in the region. Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, Saudi, Kuwait, they all do it their own way, but it's a regional thing, right? And the same thing in Pakistan, I assume. There's a lot of smart engineers. You go to California, there's a lot of smart Pakistani engineers sitting there working. Maybe you should tap into that network and build, in America, there's something called TIE, the Indus Entrepreneurs, which is an Indian lobby, basically. Not even a lobby, like a camaraderie or a fraternity of something. What's women too? But it's all the Indians sit there and have an annual meeting, and they all talk and pitch, and they have something called not even elevator pitch, something even quicker. Have 20 seconds to pitch. I forgot what it's called. And people just sit on the podium and pitch, and everybody's there, from Vinod Khosla to everybody sits in the front, and so that kind of networking helps. They all help each other. They learned from Silicon Valley how to help each other, right? And they're winners. And so it's really, depending on people that have experience and exits to come and help.
We have one over here, Sada.
Hi, my name is Avaz, Rice Capital. I just wanted to ask you, in terms of all the businesses that you've invested in and seen, what do you think are the top 3 characteristics of a really, really strong entrepreneur that really differentiate compared to people who are just good?
You know, they're really very different. I don't know if I can pinpoint three, but I know what I like, and I like, you know, you know, I mean, it's the same. It sounds like any, like, you know, inspirational quotes. I don't, you know, it's like, you know, really perseverance and stamina, and just people that know that it's a challenge uphill, and it's a tough day every day, and it is a struggle. And people that are doing that, you know, I see some founders, when they do a round, right, you see them either in California partying in Las Vegas, or here you see them, you know, all drunk in Formula One in Abu Dhabi. I'm like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? So definitely, you know, not coming in round two, you know, and so, you know, you should be hustling. As a joke, we were talking to a founder I was introduced, you know, and I saw him 3 times in the lobby of the Four Seasons in the same day. And I was like, dude, don't you have a job? You know, what are you doing here? You're pitching rich people. Okay, that takes 5 minutes, and go back to work. You know, what are you doing? And so I think you should identify how obsessed they are. Not passionate. We're all passionate people. They have to be obsessed with what they're doing, and they also have to be smart in solving a problem, not just you know, a cheesy knockoff.
Any more? Did I see any other hand? You guys are missing out. You don't get Fahed here. Oh, well, you know, Kyle's going to ask him a
I
question.
think Kyle has
Hi, Kyle Hendrick, AF Management. Fahad, I know you're an active investor in funds, and the topic of the panel, choosing the investment ticket size. Can you talk a little bit about why early stage versus late stage, particularly as it applies to sort of acquisitions and getting that sort of alpha value at being an early stage and a lot of the early stage funds that you're in?
Sure. This is going to be a little bit of a macro, and then I'll go down to this. Today, we're, I think, at the end of an economic cycle, which is normal in capitalism, and every 10 to 15 years, you know, it goes up and down. I think we're up top, and the most recent indicator that there's a big problem is the WeWork, you know, collapse and valuation, the failed IPO, right? This is an indication we're towards the end of a cycle. And if you're towards the end of a cycle, then late stage investing is kind of risky because you're going to be stuck in a big unicorn, or, you know, that is not going to be able to go public anytime soon. And we have almost 300 unicorns with, you know, over, some of them, a lot of decacorns, you know, 10 billion plus, right? So how are they going to go public, right? And the most recent IPOs have all been horrible down rounds, right? Whether it's Lyft or Slack or, you know, and even Snap, right? So, and others, not to pick on these companies, but I'm just saying, right? And we've been burnt in a few. So, but not really, because I was very early in Slack, right? So I don't care about, right? But that's the point now, back to early stage. And because we were early in Slack at a 200 million valuation, you know, I don't care if it goes to 20 billion or 6 billion, who cares, right? And that's power. And so what I think, the early stage is where the value is created. So number one, macroeconomically, it's the wrong time to go late stage right now. That's what I think, right? I think there might be a bubble bursting anytime soon, and a serious correction and a reset in valuations. So stay away from the big guys. If you're a major institutional investor that investment horizon is infinity, like KIA or Mubadala, then they have nothing to worry about. You know, talk to me in 2040, right? But we can't, right? You got LPs, you got dividends, you got all kinds of people that are on your neck all day. So early stage is where the real growth is and the hyper growth potential is, and most important, the value creation, right? You invest in a small company today, and for example, our friend Naval invested 25,000 in Uber in 2010. Right? That 25,000 returned 350 million to him, right? That's almost 600x, 6,000 and 100x, right? How many stories are like that? Well, there's 12 people that did that. But I mean, imagine all the other early investors in Pinterest, in even early investors in WeWork. It's still a $7 billion company, right? It's not a joke. I think the early stage is the best time. This is the best time to invest in the early to growth stage. Not necessarily early. You don't have to go pre-seed and seed, but even Series A and, you know, B is good because you're in the growth, right? And you want to stay in that, I think. internationally. Regionally here, I think you can do a lot because it's still an M&A market, mostly. It's not purely an exit, an IPO. And so you never know. Maybe any of these, just like Kareem again, it was an Uber acquisition. And so if you're getting, customer acquisition and you have a serious footprint in the region, you can be an M&A target, or you should be. And so in the region, I think late stage is still okay, but internationally, especially Silicon Valley, no more late stage.
Okay. Thank you, Fahad. I think we have one more question.
Ivo Detelin of Riyadh Capital. Fahad, thank you very much for your thoughts. First of all, very much appreciated. You've been probably in this ecosystem longest than everybody in the room. Have you seen a change in the social aspect of things? For example, people willing to start companies, and I mean this at any age, including career switchers, including people who have spent time in businesses. And in Europe and US, we now see people starting companies in their 50s, startup, tech, not necessarily young graduates. And then the fear of failure, which actually coming from Europe is a complete disaster. You get a black spot if you fail anything in your life. You can never recover, certainly if you bankrupt a company. And Philip mentioned on stage Tracker. We particularly liked the founder because he failed the exact same business in India. And so our investment committee embraced this with a passion. So do you see people starting businesses and taking that route over government or corporate job? And two, is the fear of failure diminishing in the region?
Which company you said you with? Lumia?
I work for Riyadh Capital.
Oh, okay, sorry.
We're investors in
Okay.
Tracker.
Yeah, I
which
heard
is
all
a tracking
that.
business.
I just didn't hear the name of the company.
And Gura failed, and
I
a lot
heard-
of people said, "Oh no, that's it. He's basically a write-off for the rest of his life."
Right. Well,
And we said,
failure-wise-
"This is exactly why we want to invest in him."
Well, thank God you're not Japanese, because you have to kill yourself if you fail, right? And so at least people just think you're a failure. But failing in California, there's no word called failing in Silicon Valley. Your idea didn't work. That's all. And they believe that. They're like, oh, it's venture capital. Here's money. If it burns, oops. You know what I mean? They go again. And how many people? Twitter, 6 times they had to raise money and their idea sucked. 6 times. And now it's, what is it, $11 billion company, and Trump uses it to rule the world, right? So failure is not, oh, I bankrupted AIG or I bankrupted Lehman Brothers because I'm so wheel, right? No, it's I take a challenge, I'm trying to fix a problem, and this is what I think I'm going to do, and I persevered, and I obsessed about this all night, and it didn't work for many reasons. And big companies, how many failed projects Google, we saw Dowra's most recent interview. He's like, we failed miserably at the autonomous vehicles. So people fail all the time, which is fine, because you're trying to innovate and come up with something new. How do you know what's new, right? Unless you do it over and over again. So I like entrepreneurs that actually had 1 or 2 startups before, because they know, and now they get it. So that's a good idea. Here, in Kuwait, there's no bankruptcy law. I'm going to talk about my country just so it's easier, so people don't think I'm picking on theirs, right? And that's the stupidest thing I think anyone can do in any entrepreneurship environment. They claim we have an ecosystem, but if you can't bankrupt. If you bankrupt, you go to jail, And then if you miss out on a payment of a router or something, you got travel ban, and they catch you in the airport. And how is this going to induce anybody? That's why most of the startups are really ultra high net worth kids. You know what I mean? Because daddy can give them another $1 million if they burn it, right? And so it is a problem. I didn't want to talk about this, but that's seriously one of the big problems here is the laws. There's no bankruptcy laws. Banks don't finance SMEs. It's very difficult to deal. If you have any black spot, as you said, on your record, people think you're a loser. And that attitude is changing. I think it's changing because people are doing startups and then changing again to another startup, and people are giving them money, like you. You're a great example of people moved on with this sort of stigma about failure. So God bless, and again, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Fahad. I think, a lot of us, who don't know you at least got to get to know you a little bit more. And I think ultimately, if I were to say, my key takeaways from this discussion is that the region is changing. We have the moving parts put in place, but we're not 100% there yet. So we shouldn't be excited and then relax. So the likes of the government and other entities needs to continue to work because we're just at the beginning. And then there's nothing wrong with sometimes investing in Silicon Valley, sometimes investing in the region and looking to bridge between markets. But ultimately, if tomorrow Erij with her small BDB salary wants to invest into a startup, I should find a VC that potentially I like the people, and learn from them. Yeah.
And then you can do it on your own, but you need to learn. So you got to learn through them, how they choose, and why they choose, and their criteria. And then once you are understand the game, go ahead.
And then this is not to one of your points was that it's different between each country or ecosystem you invest. So right now, if I'm going to go to Silicon Valley, I shouldn't be looking at late growth stage. I should be more at the earlier stage. And over here, it kind of doesn't matter because we have opportunities at each of the stages.
Yeah. Maybe I missed on this point, but this is there's a lot of potential here. 5G is here. It's not even in Silicon Valley. So a lot of technologies want to try it here. A lot of technologies come here to try it just because the FDA and the regulators are just so tough. I know the Jawbone Health Hub are doing a new health system. They're doing it in Dubai because, they can. And so imagine if that was a local company, and then they will get more support from abroad. And so there is a lot of potential here. There is a lot of potential.
Okay, any final words before we invite our next speaker?
No, just think before you invest.
That's a good one. Thank you so much, Fahad. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Arij.
Thanks. Oh, hi. Okay, it's working. Yeah. Thanks, Fahad. So I think next up we have our panelists. So as everybody starts to design, the stage, I'm going to fill out the discussion. I hope everybody enjoyed this, and I'm starting to see the room fill out. A few people sitting behind, please come in front. There's a lot of empty space. And then I'm going to invite Jahan Chu to come to the stage in a few minutes. Jahan is actually, one of the he's a founding and managing partner of a Hong Kong-based fund called Kinetic. He's also a Kaufman Fellow, and actually my Kaufman Fellow of this class. I've recently met Jahan earlier in June and was very actually inspired by a lot of his pioneering work. He's investing in an area that a lot of people are scared or wary about, which is the crypto and blockchain, and actually understands a technology that a lot of us use and maybe a lot of the startups use that we can never understand. So if any of you are interested, you need to try to grab him during the break and get his insight. But he's going to be moderating this panel, so if I can ask Jahan to come to the stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Arij, and thank you to the BDB for the very kind invitation. I'm very excited to be in Bahrain. It's my first time, so go easy on me. I'm going to invite all of my esteemed panelists to the stage. We're just going to do this very casually. Shane, Faris, Philip, and Hans, if you could just come up. We're just going to sit down. We'll get right into it. Have a seat, everybody. Let's welcome them. Thank you. Great. What I'd like to do first, actually, is just go down the line, and if you don't mind, tell everybody your name, the name of your fund, what you invest in, and if you don't mind, one recent public investment that you've made, or a recent public investment. And for Philip, I guess you can choose maybe an investment that somebody else made that you liked. Shane, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Really excited to be here. Shane Shin from Shoroka Partners. The investment that we are just announced actually is a trucker, along with RTF and Alien.
So Philip from Magnet. I'm actually very proud to be the only founder that's here, so I'll give a founder's perspective. And my public investment is in myself. And I try not to say which other startups that get investment that I like, to stay unbiased.
Yes, first of all, thank you for BDB for this invitation, and thank you for all of the attendants. And my name is Faris Al-Rashid. I'm the founder of Uqal Group. It's the first angel network group in Saudi Arabia. We have also, we have 4 chapters in Saudi Arabia, and last month we have the first event in Bahrain branch. So it's going to be, it's the first Uqal branch outside of Saudi Arabia. And my last investment, it's Lendo. Lendo is a peer-to-peer lending. We had, it's a fintech company. We got the sandbox license from SAMA.
Great.
Good day, my name is Hans from Fins Capital. We invest in financial institution technology companies, so fintech focused. We invest Series A. Mostly we come in as the first institutional investor. Made 40 investments across 2 regions. We invest in Europe and Southeast Asia, and I also started looking at the region, MENA region. 2 investments we made, one public late stage, actually super late stage, was Grab, which is the Uber clone in Asia. And another small investment we made is in a company called Pintech, which was super early stage, which is a school lending platform in Jakarta, Indonesia.
Great, thank you very much. And just on my side, again, my fund is called Kinetic. We're based in Hong Kong. We are a blockchain-focused investment platform, and we invest in early stage, mostly A rounds. And our recent investment was in a company called Securitize, which tokenizes digital assets and securities, the round was led by MUFG and Nomura and Santander. So today we're going to be, I think the title of our panel is Why is Now the Best Time to be Investing in Startups? I guess we're kind of blessed and also cursed that Fahed and Arij covered so much ground. They really just stole all the kind of questions that I wanted to ask. But I think we're fortunate to have both operators as well as investors on the stage to get a little bit deeper. So let's start off with that. Let's lay out the landscape of the region first. And let's assume that not everybody is so deep into what stage the MENA region is in terms of investing. So the question really is, and I guess Shane, we'll start with you, and because you're on your second fund now. Where are we in the region in terms of stage of investment? As an investment ecosystem, what kind of part of the cycle are we in? Earlier, more mature, and where does it go?
So I'm sure everyone feels that we're definitely still at the first or second inning of the 9th inning. The way I would like to characterize is that, in my view, we actually have a relatively concentrated capital on the Series A. Obviously, if you look at absolute terms compared to the developed markets, we still don't have enough. But my view is that we actually have a decently crowded capital on the Series A who is willing to put like $1 million, who's willing to put $1 to $2 million if the company has like a 1 million ARR and etc. But I do strongly believe we have a deep funding gap in the super early, like a pre-seed up to Series A. So like anyone who builds those companies get to the Series A, and definitely also on the Series B.
Faris, you're kind of investing in that side of things, and your angel network seems to be, maybe some of the earliest checks. How do you feel about what stage the region is in, especially in terms of what Shane is saying for that first round?
Yeah, I think still that the pre-seed and the seed is still it's not enough. There is a gap in that. But the good news that the government now is helping in this stage. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia today. SBC is having 2.8 billion riyal in these stages, which is the seed and Series A. They already committed with 14 fund, VC fund with 1 billion. So I think we will see in the coming years that this gap, which is the seed and Series A, also in Uqal, we started in 2011. We invested more than 50 companies with more than 53 million real. And I can see today, this year to date, we invested 14 investment in 1 year, which is giving you that the deal flow are much more better than before, and the stage is most of them are seed and pre-series A, which is angel. As an angel, we like the bridge financing before the Series A.
Got it. Phil, what is the data telling you in terms of when you look at, you mentioned the number of transactions that have been kind of made in the past year. Where are they coming from? And what do you think is, from a capital standpoint, working in terms of what you see from the data?
So we have seen, as I kind of said earlier, it's a bit of a pyramid because you're seeing more and more startups enter the landscape than ever before. Many of the existing funds that are raising new funds are now playing at the later stages because historically they were playing at the very early stage because there wasn't an early investment landscape. You're seeing more angel investors than ever before that are beginning to play in this space. You have the PayPal mafia concept now kicking in where many of the Korean people are now starting companies or investing themselves. But again, I think across the board, there is a lack of capital at every single level. So while I don't disagree with Shane that there are more people playing in the 1 to 2 million, there's just that many more startups requiring that capital as well. And you can take the trucker example. It's not a single investor that came in and gave 20 million. There were still multiple investors that were doing that. So we don't have that scale and size that potentially exists elsewhere of those large investments until you get to the later stage where you have begun to see larger players, the General Atlantics, the Axels coming in and playing in that space. But I think the trend is that it's still growing at every stage, just more startups. A stat I gave the other day, 65% of the top 200 funded startups in the Middle East were founded between 2012 and 2015. And if it takes 3, 4, 5 years to get to Series B or C, many of those companies are only now getting to Series B. And therefore, I think patience is something, it's going to take a while before we start seeing a flurry of activity at each of those different stages.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Hans, you're coming at it from a slightly different angle, where you've been investing in the Southeast Asia region in terms of fintech specifically. Coming into this region now, I mean, how do you select for the types of platforms? How do you do your deal sourcing? Where are you looking for those types of opportunities?
Yeah, so we invest in what I said in Europe and Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia, we look at the 3 markets, Singapore, Indonesia, and Vietnam. If you look to let's say, Europe, it's all about, let's say, the second wave of fintech, as we call it. So we look at companies who are more enabling financial institutions with, for example, KYC solutions. Could be an artificial intelligence company who developed a product which is relevant for the insurance business. We had that first wave of lending and payment and remittance. If you look to Southeast Asia, it is much more earlier stage. And the addressable market is huge. And what we try to do is we combine the experience from Southeast Asia, investing in a large consumer market with, let's say, new innovations from Europe. So, and that's also how we're going to approach the MENA region. If you look to the population, the addressable market is about, in the Arab world, 400 million, is huge. If you look also to the amount of startups, it's growing rapidly. I think we see saturation in logistics and e-commerce, but we see also fintech is coming up. In that respect, I recommend the report of Philip to read. He wrote a report on fintech, which we actually use quite frequently. But that also confirms more or less the growth of fintech here in the region. So where we look at are more, we call it the collaborative business models. So what I don't call it a failure, but what was super capital intensive in both the US as well in Europe are more the consumer-facing products. So you can think about the challenger banks like Monzo, N26, Revolut. Where we like to invest in more the B2B2C type of business models where financial institutions and fintechs partner up in their implementing a technology and improving a whole product offering and specifically digitalizing the product offering of banks in that respect. So that's what we're looking at, more B2B2C, and then from a geo perspective, we like to focus on Bahraini companies and use Bahrain as a springboard into different other markets. And it has to do with the fact that Bahrain has traditionally been a strong financial center and a lot of support also from government.
Thank you. I think that's very interesting. I think I want to ask the same question to both Shane and Faris about how you're selecting for both sectors and verticals and what you're looking for in terms of the different areas to invest in specifically in the MENA region. Are there specific technologies or are there specific verticals that you prefer, that you think that the region has edge on?
So when we launched Shorok in 2016, we had a few themes that we wanted to validate and which has proven true. For example, all of us know that we have a high GDP per capita. The online e-commerce boom was happening. So we wanted to obviously start with a strong deal from the platform, which we call it one of the 4 key themes we invest in. So platform. When the platform starts to develop, there are a lot of these derivative sectors that need to develop together. For example, payments, last mile delivery, warehouse stuff, all this distributions, logistics. So there's a lot of derivatives that we also start to focus on. And another theme of our focus is also fintech because of that reason. And third, where we start to just invest now is actually our software companies, because the way we look at it is that when the B2C is really thriving, and I do believe it's a topic I wanted to talk about down the road. I actually do believe we have a strong talent. They just don't know how to be guided. Or we know how to find the bridge of that talent, but we just don't emphasize it enough. So in my view, we will have a stronger software companies, and we start to see more, and we start to invest in them now, so that because we focus on seed, and we want to build them to the Series A. So you guys will see a lot more software companies in Series A, hopefully soon.
Can you just go a little bit deeper that? What are you really selecting for when you're evaluating each of these startups, both from a team and from a stage, and what are your kind of sweet spot selectors?
So I will not talk about the founders and the market and such, because everyone talks about that. Something that Shorok we absolutely care a lot about is the retention rate of the customers if they have customers. So about 40% of our investments were pre-revenue. So it's actually impossible for us sometimes to even get that data. But if they have a data, I call them as a blessing and a curse, then I ask for repeat customer dynamics. Because here we all know that Series B and C, we don't have a D funding, and we don't have an IPO, so I need to have a reasonable confidence that we can actually be profitable if, in the worst case. We'll still try to push in, and I'm not solving for profitability, but it's always easier to upsell to existing customers. So if you're losing customers left and right, you're actually not solving a real problem. Because every founder will tell you, my solutions are so unique, but the best way to validate that is through the customers coming back over and over. So if the companies do not have a repeat customer dynamics, then we heavily have to rely on the business model, the unit economics. Can they actually make it work? Can we help them get to the level, and is it scalable?
Faris, how about yourself in terms of how you select deals or how your platform selects deals? Are there certain verticals or areas that you prefer, or certain kind of particular characteristics that you select for?
I'll talk about Uqal. How is Uqal? We have a website, and the entrepreneur, they submit their idea through the website. Then we have a screening committee. The screening committee is screening all the project that we received.
Is it broadly open or only for companies from the region? Can anybody apply?
Only MENA.
Only MENA, okay,
yeah.
Great.
And most of them are from Saudi Arabia and from Dubai and Jordan, Egypt. But after the screening committee, we have them to come to, after they approve them, they come to the event. So we are not actually only fintech or tech, or we are open. Of course, we don't take the traditional business. It's only the scalable, the things which is disrupting businesses. And this is the way of how we choose the companies.
Got it. So it's generally open, and you're really open to all sorts of areas, and but stage is primarily that kind of
the stage
seed.
is pre-seed, seed, and pre-Series A, Series A.
Got it. Makes sense. Philip, I want to ask you a little bit about from the operator standpoint. You made the point that you're the only founder on stage, which is great. What are the kind of challenges that you've found in terms of setting up a business here that as investors we kind of need to think about as we're selecting companies, especially in the early stages? There's so many landmines in starting a company. What are the ones that you've tripped over?
I'll try to keep this short. I think recently it's becoming very clear as we've begun to grow the challenge of talent. And I don't disagree with Shane. There is a lot of talent in the region. I mean, based in Dubai, there's a huge amount of talent. The problem is switching cost. Being able to actually acquire the talent is very challenging. Regulatory-wise, I was on a panel the other day with Mudassar, and he made the excellent point that people are risk-averse as employees because of the risk of being deported or doing something wrong or making a mistake. And therefore, from a visa perspective, at least in the UAE, that creates a negative kind of environment. And as well as an employer, it's very challenging to hire and it's very hard to fire. So talent acquisition in general is not only costly, but also very challenging to kind of maintain that culture environment. The second thing is scale. I mean, ultimately, I think one of the important things is as any startup, you want to be inspired to be not only regional but global at some point. And to be able to scale successfully in the region is a bureaucratic and logistical nightmare. Trying to, and people always say, oh, Phil, you should set up your back office in Egypt, or Phil, go and get some like engineers in Lebanon. And it's like, well, yeah, it's not actually that easy to go and set up, and how do you create that entity, and who's your operating person that's going to be managing them there, and by the way, we don't have voice over IP in the UAE, so how are we going to connect with them? And so then being able to grow geographically is a challenge. I mean, I'm B2B, so it's less of an issue, but for a B2C company, that is a major issue for them to be able to try and scale. And third comes to banking and procurement. I mean, these day-to-day challenges of opening bank accounts, trying to get a credit card. I mean, I need to get a credit card. As a very simple example, I have a BVI entity owning my UAE entity. To get a second credit card requires all notarized documents from the BVI to be sent to the bank to get a simple credit card payment. I mean, that's just ridiculous to a certain extent. And then procurement with entities to receive funds. I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding that startups need cash to continue to operate, and yet corporates want to pay 30%, 60-day post payments, etc. So there's a disconnect between the two. And that's all beyond talking about funding, which I genuinely believe if you're a good company, you can receive funding, but to be able to become a good company, you need to be able to operate and not get starved of revenue or growth, and that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I think you've made a really good case for why not to start up in the region. But what's the flip side of it? I mean, obviously there's many reasons too.
The flip side is, if you're able to overcome all of this stuff, then the US counterparts and the Asian and the European are not going to do it, because for them it's just a headache. Whereas if you can create the opportunity for yourself here, then you become very interesting. And I think the Kareem example, or the Souk, or all of these examples, and even somebody, Fahad was mentioning Magnet. I mean, we're not trying to replicate the CB Insights or PitchBook. We're actually creating something that's different that could potentially come on to compete, or I would like it to come on compete. But I think the opportunity is if you can hustle. And if you go to the UAE, we're doing a new report, but 35% are ex-bankers, ex-consultant, ex-MBAs as founders in the UAE. Those are the people that literally argue with regulators, argue with banks, get this stuff done. You create an opportunity for acquisition that you may not be able to do because it already exists elsewhere.
Hans, when you're thinking about investing in the region, I mean, would you agree with what Philip is saying in terms of some of the reasons to invest in companies here? I mean, what other edge do you think that the MENA region has versus the opportunity cost of, say, investing in the next Chinese company or the next Indonesian company or the next kind of Silicon Valley company? What is it that kind of attracts you to this region? And then same question to you, Shane, because you've made a big decision to kind of be here.
Yeah, so two things. So from a more, let's say, holistic point of view, and then I will zoom in a bit on fintech. So in general, the entry barrier to get into the region is tough. What Philip mentioned, to set up a business, to recruit people, to really understand the local dynamics is super difficult for a foreign company to get into the region. So what we try to do as an investor is leverage technology, which we have seen, which have been very successful in Europe and Southeast Asia, and then apply it in the MENA region. Doesn't mean that we just help the company from Europe or Southeast Asia to expand, but just look for a similar business model or a team which is able to execute on that business model, and we help them with that because we can leverage our knowledge, experience, and network which we have. But the entry barrier is very high. Then from a fintech perspective, I think what is changing rapidly is the scalability of business models, and that's given by the fact that in Bahrain, but also in other countries in the region, like Oman, for example, Qatar, etc., the regulatory sandbox has been introduced, which means that you can develop a fintech solution or tech solution in general in a ring-fenced environment. And you don't have to be concerned as an entrepreneur that you're going to be attacked by the regulator, because the regulator more or less protecting you in developing that solution. What would be amazing, and that's actually the discussion we would like to have with the regulator actually, is to passport, let's say, that license from, let's say, Bahrain to Dubai to Qatar, etc. Right? So what we've seen in Europe is the passport of a fintech license. So if something similar would be introduced here in the region, I think that will be a complete game changer. But in general, yeah, we like the market very much. There's a lot happening. What I mentioned before, the startup scene is really increasing. What we look at for teams, so get back to your previous question, is more or less a combination of really local understanding and having that international focus. So what we do not like, with all respect for the guys, is the so-called rocket internet model, where we just copy-paste everything what's happened outside the region and just copy it into Bahrain, for example. What we like to do is invest in companies who have this local understanding, but learn from what's happening outside the region. So that's a combination we're always looking for.
Got it. And Shane, how about you? Same question over to you in terms of the region's edge. I mean, we're in the same Kaufman Forum, so we've talked a lot about it, but I would love for you to kind of share, the opportunity that you saw and why you made such a big jump to be here. I think you're the most Arab Korean I know.
And my parents still ask me, why did I leave Mubadala Ventures team to join a one-man shop with Mahmoud back in 2016, because they actually still don't understand the Middle East. So I actually had a long, elaborative answer, but really a few punchlines. First, I truly believe as an expat, I truly believe the Middle East and Africa is the largest untapped startup and a VC market globally. And I also believe that the here, VC ecosystem here, regulators here, they actually embrace the foreigners to come and really be part of the community, which I'm so blessed to be a part of. So that's really on a high level. But if you look at the fundamentals, right, I do believe it is a perfect time to be an entrepreneur and also an investor for a few reasons. First, we all talked about the funding issues. Yes, there are definitely funding issues, but we are making right progress. I know the team at BDB, team at Saudi, team at UAE, team in Jordan, team in Oman, each one of them is coming up with strong initiatives to support. So that is already a first step. We need to do a lot more, but it's happening. Second, if you also look at the operating the business, because Philip would agree that, frankly, getting into different markets has made it easier, at least like 10 times in the last 2 years. I remember some of our portfolio companies early on in 2015 and 16, they spent literally a year and a half to get into Saudi. Like just to get into Saudi from UAE, they were telling me it takes like a year and a half. But now with Sagia, when a lot of other initiatives, they're actually there in a month. Like that is a significant benefit. And for any startups to really be a dominant player, that scalability, access to market has to be easier, but it's a perfect time to be a bit early and help them get there. And also the regulation standpoint, we have a lot more comfort and protection on the fund managers and also on the startups. Now foreign ownership is getting more generous. You also have ADGM, you also have DIFC, you have a lot of other jurisdictions that are actually a bit more protection. So I do believe it's actually a great market to be in. And sometimes I always feel that locals need to believe in their home country and the region a little bit more, because there's a huge interest from Asia and the US and Europe. And they're actually seeking for local confidence, but local confidence, in my view, sometimes we don't give enough. That actually distracts them actually from coming here. You know. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
No, that's great. I think those are really wise words and also very inspiring, so thank you. I want to flip it a little bit from the structural thing to the cultural side. I think Fahad was saying a little bit about, and I think it was also brought up here, about the culture of startups, the culture of founders. And I'm curious as to how to solve for that. So really the first question, and I'll start off with Faris. How do you find the culture of the kind of startup culture and the VC culture generally? For the founders, I mean, what are really the challenges either from specific countries, whether it's local laws or whether it's, in Asia we have a much more conservative culture, and so it's not seen as proper for kids to be going out and starting their own companies until recently. What are those kind of challenges here, and how do you solve for them? Do you start to see that change, or is that an additional barrier in order to have a vibrant startup culture?
I think the culture of ours, that the failure, that they don't like to be a failure, and also because we are in a wealthy government and country, people, they like to work with the government. But we can see that there is a lot of change today with the culture of entrepreneur and the family. They agree that it's better to be an entrepreneur rather than an employee, because they can see that there is a support from the government and also support from the family and friend. And we can see the ecosystem today. If I go back in 2011 or today, there is a lot of change and regulation, and I'm talking about also Saudi Arabia, the regulation and sandbox and fintech. It was for an entrepreneur, he likes to start a new business, normally new business without regulation. And I remember when we started Kareem in Saudi Arabia, there was no regulation, and that's the beauty of the entrepreneur. You go and find the way of finding this. Today, the regulator are doing things faster than the private sector, and they want to help the private sector. I can see today Sagia also, as Sean said, today you get your license in 4 hours. If you are not a Saudi company, with ADGM also. So I think the culture is starting to move. The other thing is the exits, what happened in the region. And I was surprised that Philip, he said this year we have 23 exits. And I think with what we see, then what we see in an exits, we'll start to see an entrepreneur who will come to this startup, because we have talented people, but still they are employees, CEO of companies. And so when they get out and start their startup company, we will see a big company. And I believe that we will have, hopefully, a unicorn coming from Saudi Arabia, not only from Dubai.
Philip and Shane, do you guys agree with that? I mean, do you find that the family validation as well as the kind of the governmental support really is a driver for that kind of culture shift to make it okay to be an entrepreneur and okay to fail and okay to kind of keep driving? And is it consistent among different countries, or is it specific to, you know, there's more risk taking in certain countries, and that's perhaps where we'll see a lot more innovation, a lot more pace?
I just wanted to add another factor, because I think this is actually a big factor, and the proof is actually people here. So I normally call our good friends at Biko, MVP, Wamda, all these guys as a phase one, who really paid with their own sweat and tears to build the ecosystem to this level. And unfortunately, the truth is a lot of startups, they reach out to them, but they can only fund like so many. So if they get declined by them, there was a lot of stigma probably that, oh, like these companies are not good. But now, like if you look at the room here, we have so many diverse group of investors. Obviously 500 Startups plays a big part, like Eliad, RTF, and we have international investors, like, and also we have Venture Soup. So we have a lot of different, let's say, breed and diversity, where startups, even if they get no from MVP and Biko, they can still come to us, and we'll still invest if we believe in them. They will still get invested by RTF, Hala, and all these guys. So that, and startups, you know, entrepreneurs are so cliquey, they talk to every single one of them. And if you get this community that you can be declined by phase one or any other VC, but still there is a group of VCs who can back you, I think that cultural, let's say, courage is actually just coming up, and I think that's a big part of the more entrepreneurs coming to the scene.
Philip?
So I think it differs a lot by geography. I'm not a local, so I can't speak for the local entrepreneurs, but I think that if you look at the UAE, for example, the majority are expats, so they're coming with a very different mindset to locals. Although many of the expats are actually Arabs, they're expats. But if you go to Lebanon or Egypt, you'll have a completely different mindset. So one of the things that we want to look at is what exactly is the drivers for many of these founders. But I think that the biggest problem, in my opinion, at the risk of sounding a little controversial, is that the whole entrepreneurship space is very glamorized in the press. There is continued pursuit across all kind of governments to focus on entrepreneurship, and a lot of it is focused on the blockchain, the AI, the summit, the investment, the billion-dollar fund, etc., which can somewhat skew the reality of what it's like to be an actual entrepreneur. And yet not much is spoken about some of the challenges and the failures that you have here. And another issue that I've seen is that in many geographies, there is no consolidation of institutions or area by geography. What do I mean by that? Is bringing places together. One of the few examples that's actually very successful is Lebanon, where you have the BDD, which is right in the heart of Beirut, but unfortunately the market itself is a bit challenging. If you go to Dubai, for instance, it's not like there aren't enough institutions. It's just, we did this once on a tweet. We took a map, and you could plot where all the VCs are, where all the incubators, accelerators, and co-working spaces, and they're spread across the whole of the city. And yet, and I don't want to compare it to Silicon Valley, but one of the values of what they had originally, and remember this is many, many years ago, was it was organically built out of a certain area. And that intellectual capital transfer of being able to share your thoughts, ideas, challenges, views, is something. I mean, I'm part of 500 Startups, and they do their annual retreat. I think the first one is about 60, 70, the second one was 120, then 250, and you're saying now 400 might be going. The value you get of being able to share and meet fellow entrepreneurs, the challenges they're facing, whether it's trying to scale to Saudi, who's the person you speak to, who's the lawyer you should speak to, etc., I feel is something that currently is missing a bit because everything is a little bit desperate. But I think that that's something that could be addressed to try and help grow a much stronger culture, whether it is for success or failure.
That's a really interesting point. Do you think that comes from the startups themselves having the kind of networks or platforms? Or do you think it comes from the investment networks who kind of create the context and create the kind of opportunities and events? I mean, from anyone, what have you seen that works either in other regions or what you think could work here in terms of building that kind of founder network? Anyone, go ahead. Whatever you see.
I think in Paris, people talk a lot about the Station F concept, whereby they brought all of these institutions into one area. I mean, Singapore, I was in Singapore for 6 months. I think you have all the universities and many of the tech hubs that are very close to each other.
Yeah.
Being able to, I think my personal view is if the government's focused more on trying to create the infrastructure to encourage and incentivize people to move to certain jurisdictions where they can benefit from things and cluster things together, that will help enable an organic growth. But it's not just the founders. You need the corporates, the investors, the service providers, the tech companies to be congregated together. I think that's something that could help.
Got it. Hans, what do you think?
Yeah, so what we have done is we created more or less our own ecosystem. So first of all, our investment strategy is that we never invest in competing businesses in our fund. So if we invest in, let's say, a peer-to-peer lending company, then we will not invest in a similar business, even if it is just in total different geography. So what we try to realize is maximum synergies between the different companies, and that these guys amongst themselves start just sharing knowledge, information, also share their challenges. So that's very helpful. Secondly, we have a large network of financial institutions which we bring to our companies. And those financial institutions are not always our LPs or our investor, but just could be a potential partner for the companies where we invest in. And then thirdly, we are also ourselves pretty collaborative if it comes to investing in deals. So we like to co-invest or invite other guys to co-invest with us. So if you look to this part of the world, we're relatively unexperienced. We understand fintech very well, but the local dynamics is not something which you underestimate. So if we make an investment, then we like to partner up with other guys, right? And that's also building an ecosystem, because what we bring to the table is maybe a different perspective than a local investor, right? So that's also the approach we're using.
Faris?
Yeah, and in Uqal we have now more than 300 members. And we have a project with the SVC, which is a matching program. And I think this is very good for networking and also to have a syndicate. Today in Uqal, we can have a syndicate, which is one in Jeddah and one in Riyadh and one in eastern side in Sharqiya, and they are investing together in one company. And this matching program is the SPC is giving, let's say if we invest in 1 million, they put 1 million. So the carry is 100% for the investor. So you get 10% hurdle rate and 100% carry to the investor, this is very good for the angel investor to invest in this stage. And the good thing is the syndicate is very important for growing the company and scale it. And today we have in Bahrain, hopefully, maybe inshallah 2 months, we will have another branch in Oman, Muscat, and also we will have, and I think this is very good for company to scale in the GCC, and that's the network that we are having in Uqal.
No, it sounds like a great program. One last word, I guess we'll just go down on that really quickly. Any last words of advice or kind of guidance for the institutional investors in the audience who maybe haven't kind of been investing in the region? What are your kind of words of wisdom or guidance? What do you hope for the kind of investors? Shane, you first.
This is a hard one. I do believe that there's a lot more room for investors to collaborate more. So I think entrepreneurs tend to collaborate a lot more. And I know investors, we do collaborate, especially on a more like a cliquey setting.
Yeah.
And I guess it's hard to change that because we collaborate on and compete at the same time.
Right.
But however, I do think, because I agree with you, although we like to lead, especially the seed and pre-series, that we try to always bring others. And we have seen so much value, and we love doing that. So
collaboration.
it's always great to collaborate and co-invest and build companies together. Because at the end, that's going to be great for all of the ecosystem.
Great, more winners. Philip?
I don't think it's for me to advise investors on what they should be doing. However, I will say that for many of you that do have portfolio companies, it's very hard for us to change regulation and government initiatives as individual founders, but you guys have a portfolio of founders that have many similar challenges. If you were to, either as VCs or collectively, which is even more powerful, crowdsource the challenges and actually put on a front to say these are really issues that need to be addressed that really spur on the ecosystem, you are the people that are able to do that much more effectively than us as founders.
Broadcast the learnings. Great. Faris?
My advice is make sure that when you invest as a VCs, when you invest in a company, that you have an angel investor before.
Definitely, definitely.
He will help you in the company.
Excellent. Hans?
Yes, I think that the right time to invest in early stage. So I recommend VCs and institutionals to put their money in early stage companies. The building blocks of the ecosystem, I don't want to call it that the work is done, but yeah, the fundamentals are definitely there. There's a strong ecosystem of VCs, also great teams which we see. There's a regulatory framework in place, great incubation programs, etc. So I think it's the right time to invest. And also diversity is huge. You can invest in fintech, e-commerce. There are different themes where you can put your money in. So I would recommend to everybody in the room to look at early stage investment.
Great. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, if anybody has them. Sir in the back.
Really around engagement with the corporate sector, because I haven't heard that much so far, and I think one of my bugbears over the years has been, how do we find a mechanism to get corporates to adopt, embrace, and participate in entrepreneurship? Because proof of concept, capital, and tons of potential entrepreneurs sitting inside corporates. So I think, and then when you meet entrepreneurs, as one does, getting into corporates as customers is one of the hardest things. I mean, it's impossible for even Kareem in the early days when we were engaged in the corporate sales. We couldn't get through to Emirates and many of these organizations because they were like, who the hell are these guys, right? We're a brand, they're just a bunch of guys. So, what can we do as a group, open question to the panel, to get corporates to be part of the next wave? Because I think, the opportunity for them to support entrepreneurship is, in my opinion, exponential.
Yeah, that's a great question. So how to engage corporates and how to get them more involved? Or on a positive note, which corporates are already out there you think that are doing a great job at it and should be kind of replicated?
I mean, I have a thought, but it actually requires a team's effort. I mean, just to respond to your question, some corporates are actually quite active, like a Crescent, they're quite active. There are some, let's say, big conglomerates who are getting active. ETR from Abu Dhabi is also starting to be active. So it is still a challenge. One idea I had that I discussed with, frankly, my friends in the UAE is that I want to choose, let's say, 40 big families and big conglomerates. And each one of them actually do want to work with VC, with the startups. So if you actually reach out to the right guys and ask them, they say, oh, we're keen, because all of them are eyeing on the startups, eyeing on the all the bubbles coming up from the startup world. But what they're so risk averse, and it takes so much time for them to do a small deal, and it doesn't make sense for them because they are like multi-billion-dollar companies, and for them to take 9 months, 6 months to do a $1 million deal, even if it's like a business development deal with a startup, it's really a hard sell. So what we propose to them is, look, like, hey, you guys don't even have to invest in the funds, but invest in the startups that we are gonna invest, especially if they add a value to your business. And we actually start to have some of our portfolio companies actually be integrated with these companies, and so that they start to get into habit of working with the startups. And also we ask them to pay to the startups, because these guys, frankly, in the US, if there's a software company, they will get a $10 million of revenue from one company. Here, you might get $100,000. So it's really that challenge.
Got it. Any other questions? Last question? I think it's coming behind you.
Thank you, guys. You guys are all really great, and we learned a lot. I have a question either for Faris or for Philip. You both kind of mentioned how, Philip in particular mentioned how the right hand really needs to talk to the left hand. People need to coordinate. He said, you don't know if you go to Dubai or Kuwait, who's the best compliance lawyer and how to navigate through the different regulators. So both of you guys, you through Magnet and Faris through Aqal, why don't you just start a network or a lobby or some sort of, activate a mechanism whereby, people share and cooperate. Because, I mentioned that earlier. I said, one of the successes of Silicon Valley is everybody is networked and everyone helps everybody else. And so whether on your Magnet platform, which is essential, or Aqal, just to, I know it's a network of angel investors, but people want to learn, right? And cut unnecessary red tape.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Magnet was born out of the fact that we tried to create a platform across the region as opposed to each country because of this particular need, which isn't the case in Silicon Valley because a lot of information is shared offline that isn't required online. That is something that we looked at, we did previously, we took it off. I think from an implementation perspective, it is definitely in our plans as we continue to build out the community side of the Magnet platform. But how you do that as a startup to make that effective is very different to just sharing names. And that's, for me, the trick, is from a startup perspective, to make that work for Magnet, how do we do that effectively to get virality or use of it, rather than just having a listing of different companies and having them rated. But that's something that we're working on.
Great. I think we will. Oh, sorry. Did you want to respond once?
Thank you for your question. Actually, this is that's what we are working now. And one of the things that we find in the Angel Group and Network is how we close the deal. It's very difficult. The entrepreneur is a Saudi company, and we want to invest in the regulation, and we don't have stock options, we don't have other assets. So we come up with now we are working with lawyers and with some of our members to come up with our converted note. We have save and KES, and so we come up with why don't we have our MENA note, let's say. So it's going to be in Arabic. We are now working in it in English, then we will translate it. It's going to be an English law, so it has to be in English. But the idea of having it in Arabic, so it's good for education, for let the people who are actually not an angel or not an entrepreneur to understand what is the note and why we have a converted note. The other thing is we are doing learning and training for our members. Yesterday and 2 days, it was a workshop for our angel group. We have 60 members of our Uqal. Dr. Muhammad, he was one of the speakers. We want to show them how to make the deal, what is the evaluation, because we can see now, especially in Saudi Arabia, the valuation is very high in the seed because angels are coming and they are. So we want to educate them, and I think we will do it regularly. And rather than we have it 2 days, we will do it a focus. So 1 day for term sheet and the converted note, and 1 day for evaluation, and we will do it regularly, inshallah, with our members, and hopefully to see it, inshallah, in Kuwait. We'll have Uqal there.
Great. I think we're unfortunately out of time. So I want to thank all of you for your attention. As Arij said, if you have any questions on blockchain, I'm happy to answer them offline. Otherwise, I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Shane and Philip and Faris and Hans, for all of their very valuable insights. Thank you very much.
Hi guys, so as the stage is being redesigned, I wanted to thank Jahan, who flew in from Hong Kong just for this session, and then for the rest of our panelists. I think that there's a lot of interesting topics that were being raised, and I think a lot of this collaboration, and one of sort of the ideas behind bringing everyone here today is to actually have this cross discussion and cross collaboration. I know most of you know each other or have some kind of interactions, but sometimes it's hard to get everybody into the room in, let's say, a less sort of hectic setting, whereby this kind of cross idea or pollination of ideas and being able to just discuss certain things that most of you as investors have in mind. Next up, we have someone whose name has been mentioned already quite a number of times this morning, by Fahad initially, actually. So Emir and the Beko Group have been friends of Invested for quite some time and friends of the BDB. They were actually the first people who came together and helped support us when we first had Invested back in 2016 along with the Venture Souk team here. And so for those of you who don't know Emir, I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more, but he's one of the partners at Beko Capital, one of the, let's say, more advanced or let's say more experienced venture funds in MENA. First believers in MENA, and I hopefully continue to believe in MENA. Like Fahad mentioned, they recently closed their second fund at 100 million, and Emir is going to be talking a little bit about how to actually succeed in this space and whether investing in MENA is actually going to prove to be successful. So that's a round of applause for Emir.
Thanks, Arij. Thanks, BDB and Arij and her team. I got told by Yusuf, unfortunately, who couldn't make it, that he needed someone to take his place. So the subject is how to make big returns by investing in small startups. So I thought about it, and I said, you know what? We obviously, as Fahad mentioned, raised our $100 million fund, and I thought I'd give you an idea of how we look at deployment and obviously how we think about returns that can be generated once we deploy a $100 million fund. So it's an Excel sheet, not a PowerPoint, but basically it just kind of, I'll guide you through it to give you an idea of the variables and the drivers that we consider when we want to deploy the capital and make money for our LPs. So, I'm going to have to use this pointer if it works, which doesn't. So, top left of the screen, it's going to be hard for me to navigate, but we're a $100 million fund. And we obviously have management fees to cover the cost of operating the fund. And in our case, it's 2% management fees that scales down after your investment period. And for us, that's 4 to 5 year period. And from year 6 onwards, there's a 0.25 decline in fees. But that totals to around 17.5%. And if you take that away from the 100 million, you actually only have 82 million and a half to deploy. And so for us, when we look at the region, we think that there are probably going to be, today, given the growth of the ecosystem, two to three companies on an annual basis that over a 10-year period will become $500 million plus in size, right? Obviously, venture is a patient game, as Philip mentioned. It's a 10-year life, and some companies, even in the Valley, last 13, 14 years before they exit. So when we look at vintages, the past couple of years, we think there are probably 4 that have been created that you will see emerge as $500 million companies. So that means on a yearly basis, 2 or 3 companies emerge, and for us, that means we have to make enough bets to try and get those 2 to 3 companies. And then when we look at our portfolio, and we're very concentrated, given that that's a small base of companies that are coming out of the region, we have to really concentrate our efforts in taking ownership and adding value to these companies to make sure they get to that kind of scale. So when we look at our strategy, we say, okay, we're going to invest in about 18 companies. To be diversified, you need to hit 23 plus, sometimes 30 companies, but we're a concentrated fund, so we invest in 18 companies. And based on the power law model of venture, is that okay? Okay, sure. Based on the power law of venture, you make 10 investments, most of them, like let's say 5 or 6 go to 0, a couple go to 1x, and the rest, two of them will basically generate most of the returns. And when we look at like our peer VCs in the US, we find that the best VCs basically are able to get a third of their portfolio really generating those outlier returns. And we want to be the best VC in the region, or at least perform to that kind of metric. And so when we look at our strategy, we want to invest in about 18 companies, a third of which are going to be our winners, and then 2/3 are going to be losers, right? Money back losers for us, we put it in the same bucket. So that means in these two columns, money back is going to be 12 of the 18 that get you 0 returns, and you're going to have 6 that are going to be the winners. But winners for us has different return profiles. Some are going to be the really, really outlier returns, and for us, that's a 12x plus metric. I don't want to use my fingers, but over here. And so we think that 50% of those winners are going to be 12x returns for us and above, and 50% are going to be 4x returns, which are okay returns, great returns in our profile here. And so the math is quite simple. If we take the 6, and then by concentrated, what we do is we put 70% of our deployable capital into those 6. If we are able to follow on in a diligent enough way, that should be what we do with our capital. And that's the hard part in this space. The follow-on funding decisions really can determine a lot about your return profile. So we would invest 70% in our winners, and then we would target a specific ownership in those winners, at least 10%, if not 20% over the life of the company. And so when you look at the return profile at the bottom and the exit value, for the winners that are the 3 that are of the 6 that are going to be outliers, they have to be billion-dollar opportunities. And of the great companies, they have to be $400 million plus. So when we look at companies, we spend some time on understanding the size of their opportunity, outside of obviously backing the founders early on. And so we try and find those really strong outliers, and so are disciplined in that approach. And so we sum those return profiles, and hopefully we can get to, on the far left, a $462 million return on the fund, which is on a net basis is kind of close to a 4x. And in the venture world, anything 3x and above, you're really doing outstandingly well. And so the other indicator for us and how we operate is that if we look at the money back losers, that's 2 million per company. And so what we tell our founders is that, listen guys, most of them we invested, and girls obviously, we invest early, seed and Series A, and most of them are still figuring out product market fit. So we say we're able to invest 2 million into you with sort of some flexibility, but the objective is that 2 million should get you to find product market fit. And if you do find product market fit, we would be doubling down that investment, putting a further 4 or sometimes a further $6 million to really have a sizable enough allocation. So, we're big investors, some of you may know, in Kitopi and Swivel, which are, in our opinion, potentially home runs, and we have a sizable amount of our capital deployed in those companies. And so maybe if I move to the summary slide, summary sheet, if you can do that. So I think for us, the message is that we think that there are 2 to 3 $500 million opportunities being created in the Middle East on an annual basis that become $500 million in 10 years. We think that you need to have enough shots at bat to capture those opportunities. But in the US, obviously, you're talking, that number is more like 20 times a year, 30, maybe even 50 times a year. Those companies, billion-dollar companies, are going to be created on an annual basis. So that's why diversification makes a little bit more sense in those markets. And for us, ownership matters, so we really try and take a big stake in these companies. And then finally, the amount of capital deployed in the winners, which is all about follow-on funding decision-making. And so we spend a lot of time on that, especially by using data to determine product market fit and other things. So we haven't made crazy returns yet, so this is our hypothesis, and this hopefully will play out in the next few years for our first fund and fund 2. But I thought this would be an interesting perspective to share with you all, and happy to maybe have time for a couple of questions if anyone has. Feel free to challenge it and give me thoughts.
Out of interest, how much has this evolved from your first fund in terms of hypothesis, and what were the learning lessons from there that you applied in this one?
I mean, we didn't take ownership seriously enough early on. So in our first fund, we didn't do that. We were a holdco structure, so it's kind of a different learning in that we thought we would raise more money in that same structure, but we had to not do that. And then we realized how important follow-on is and how to plan for follow-on. It's really difficult to plan for follow-on. So ownership, follow-on, and then what we also realized is how to, the follow-on decision for us, we started looking at data to support that decision versus, you know, sometimes you get emotionally attached to founders and their journey, so you kind of, your decision making is kind of biased in some capacity. So with the data, you kind of remove that bias a little bit. So that's another point. And making sure we really put a lot of our capital into those companies.
And if I can just quickly follow up, do you automatically start looking to do Fund 3? I mean, do you start the process of fundraising again to avoid a lag in starting that exercise?
So we went late in our first fund. We started raising when we were 80% deployed, but also the structure of the holdco pivot into a fund was there. I think this time around we've learned, so we're nearly 50% deployed in our second fund, and even though it was announced recently, we started investing nearly 2 years ago. So I would say that we'll probably go out and, I mean, I shouldn't be saying anything actually, I have no comment there. That's what I was told by lawyers, so let's leave that aside. Yes.
This is more like a question that I always ask. I'm curious about how other VCs make their decision. So at the end, follow on, we all know that VCs, we make the most returns by the outliers. But those outliers, because they're already outliers, sometimes the additional money you put really gives you such a marginal increment. Because for example, some company starts to become so expensive and you have a limited capital, and like for you to decide to put 10 million to get 1%, perhaps even less than 1%, or like, whereas that 10 million, you can get like 15% of another company. So I'm just curious to get your thought. There's no right answer, but get your thoughts on how you make that decision. Is there any general rule of thumb you guys apply?
No, I think it's a great question. I mean, we're learning. So I'll tell you, when we write our first check, we typically lead the first check, and we're big allocators in the second check. We do more than our pro rata in our next ticket. So what we call is double down. So we basically double down hard at the second check. And then the third check, we may put a small amount, but really that's, our doubling down decision is really what's key to building ownership. And we wouldn't do it if it was, you know, getting 0.1 or 1% of a company. It would have to be significant ownership for that to happen. And because we're early, that we, you know, most companies, like in Katopi's case, obviously, we invested in the first 2 rounds, and we built enough ownership that we're not going to invest in the round now. So.
I have a follow-up question to Shane's. On the first sheet, you showed how the fund returns stack up if you have a certain assumption around exit stake of 10%. But what at least we're seeing in the Pakistan market, which is different to the MENA region, of course, but I would imagine that this effect is more pronounced in MENA, that as more capital is coming in, you do have a little bit of this like raising of valuations, more capital kind of going in. So in your actual experience, is it turning out to be as you had envisaged at the beginning when you think about portfolio construction and the stakes that you're actually ending up with? Are they consistent, or are you having to tweak those as you go along because the ecosystem itself is also progressing at a rapid pace?
Yeah, great question. I think capital efficiency becomes important for us when we look at companies. So how many rounds of funding are they going to take? We project out future funding rounds to understand what our dilution could look like, but obviously that changes, so it's constantly tweaked, right? I think initially we thought we wanted to target 20%, but then we realized that's quite difficult to do with our size of fund. And so it's a constant iteration, but we think that if we don't end up at 10% at the end of the company, we're not getting the best out of our investment strategy.
A very quick follow-up to that. Does that impact how your LPs look at you? Because obviously you had a different structure first fund, now you have a second one, you'll be going out there, even not announcing right now, but hopefully going out there at some point for fund 3. Do they look back at it and be like, hey, when you started, this was your portfolio construction hypothesis, but actually the fund was very differently invested?
I think the learning we're taking now from a fund two perspective is a lot to do with pacing, right? We really invested fast in our second fund, right? So that's one of the learnings, and that's something we have to have a dialogue with our LPs with to make sure that they understand what we're seeing, right? And from a strategy perspective, look, it's so far these are like static numbers, but at the end of the day, it's like a benchmark, right? It's going to always vary a little bit here and there, and I think if we are able to address those issues by learning from our investments, I think we'll figure it out. I don't know if that answers your question properly, but
yes, thank you. My question is, in your first fund, what was the percentage of the follow-on? And what is going to be in your second fund? The second question is, do you have a recycling also? Recycling.
Yeah, so recycling is very challenging to do because the exits don't happen as often, and we don't invest late stage to have that window where we can generate returns sooner. But we have a couple of opportunities to recycle in our first fund now, which we may consider, but unlikely. Your first question was on
the follow-on.
Yeah, follow-on. Yeah. So 50% was in our first fund in terms of follow-on funding allocation. Here it's probably a bit more to 60% in terms of proportion of our total funds in follow-on. If we get our strategy right, but that again, that's what we're figuring out now.
Thank you.
Hi, Amir. Here.
Hey, man. Omar, I think has. Okay. Walid, yeah, sorry. Walid, go ahead.
Amir, stepping back from fund economics a little bit, Fahd had mentioned capital and talent. And then you looked at the 3 companies that were better than the 12, and then you put them into your great companies 3 and good companies at 3. What's it going to take to either increase those 3 to higher valuations and make the ecosystem just sort of put out a lot more successes? So where do you think is a fundamental change, at least for our region, where these numbers are going to spur up?
So I think if you take Kareem, right, I think someone had mentioned, maybe Fahad or somebody else on the panel, maybe Shane, that Kareem has created a lot more companies, just one of those. So I think it's just basically when the cycle, if we do create $3 billion companies, those 3 are going to create maybe 15, 20 new companies. And I think that compounding effect is happening. We're just literally at the start of it with Kareem. It's the only company that we believe today is really churning out at scale, at enough scale, some exciting founders and some.
So nothing to be done either on a legislation perspective or a VC perspective. It's happening. We just need to give it time.
Yeah, I think all stakeholders are aligned for it to happen, even the regulators today, that I think it's the shift in sentiment is for this to happen more and more. Even Kareem, for example, trying to build this payment platform that can also accelerate. I think on the fintech side, there are a couple of companies that we're seeing that are trying to build infrastructure that allows for these companies to avoid a lot of the issues of the fragmentation of the region. I think when people solve for that, that's only going to accelerate it, but I think it's going in that direction anyway. Yeah.
Hi, Amir. How are you? Thank you for this. I'm actually interested to see the diversified deployment model, right? So the concentrated model, you had 16 companies, a lot of assumptions that there's going to be a handful of unicorns. As we know in the region, things are still starting to pick up, but the likelihood of more companies being valued at $100 to $200 million is probably just a higher probability. So I just wanted to see how the diversified deployment model fares against the concentrated deployment model, which to me seems more of a Silicon Valley type strategy, where if you're a really good VC and you land 3 unicorns out of 16, obviously you're going to have a phenomenal result for your fund. But in the region, given that there's more of a probability of companies landing a valuation between $100 to $300 million and not necessarily heading to the unicorn, but again, a great result for you guys because you're going to be seed and Series A investors. Just wanted to see how those sort of fare up and how you guys think about it.
When we thought about modeling diversified, I mean, there's all kinds of strategies, right? There's not, But in diversified case, what we learn is that you need enough high quality deal flow. Okay, 100 to 200 is great, but if you're not targeting a fund maker with at least the outliers of your company, you're going to struggle to really generate outsized returns, right? So the concentrated strategy differs in that it's much more volatile. If you screw up the concentration of capital, your return profile is a disaster. And with diversified, you have enough shots at bat, and if you allocate pretty much the same amount of capital for all those companies, and you'd focus on just getting a hit rate that is relatively high, you'll make really decent returns. So it's more stable because it de-risks that issue of concentration. So I mean, I just think that it's appropriate here just because the exit market is already tough, and I think for the 100 to 200 companies, $200 million companies, I don't think it's going to be that easy to create and sell and exit these ones. And if you do go through that process, the return profile is, it's not bad, it just means you need a lot more of those to actually make good returns.
And just as a quick follow-up, you know, obviously you guys didn't have $100 million in assets under management from day one. So how did you guys think about the strategy between, you know, landing 20 million up to 100 million? Because a strategy at 20 and a strategy at 50 and a strategy at 100 is quite different. So how did you guys sort of think of that, and how did it evolve over the last 2 years while you guys were fundraising?
20, you mean the first fund?
Well,
the second
for
fund?
the first, for example, for Fund 2,
Yeah.
the first close was at X million
Yeah, it
dollars,
was at
then
30.
you ended up with 100. How did that strategy from day one up until final close evolve in your thinking? Because a $100 million strategy is very different than 50, very different than 20. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, we were targeting 80 million as a fund. We hit the hard cap of 100, and then we would have, one thing we realized, maybe against Fahad's point, because he was like 100 million, how are you going to generate returns, is that we were like, we need to maybe raise a little bit more than 100, maybe 120, because we saw, you know, round sizes growing really fast. And, you know, the winners were coming out of our portfolio quite quickly, at least from a traction perspective, you know. So we started thinking about follow-on a lot more. We had an opportunity to really concentrate our capital into 2 companies. We didn't take that decision, right? Because we had set this strategy up from the get-go, right? It hasn't changed because of our first close or to our final close, but we've been thinking a lot more about that follow-on issue, which is something that's emerged from the fact that, you know, we invest in Kitopi, and Kitopi now is just, it's growing so fast that we didn't anticipate that happening when we started our fund, right? So we're still learning. I don't know if that answers your question. Hello, Habib. I thought you were going to ask.
Amir, thank you so much. So the question that I have here is around ownership. With more funds, more capital being deployed, are you getting that 10% from the get-go and just exercising pro rata, or are you doing super pro rata? And if doing the super, how are you building the platform? Because there's natural tendency, if you look at Silicon Valley, they want to diversify their investors, and they want to say, like, you know, I already got money from you, I know you have skin in the game, I want to get money from X, because they also going to compound and add significant amount of value. So how are you building around Beko to say, like, we gonna up that 10%, we want to get it, and here's the reason why you would take it from us and not from someone else?
So, great question. I think for us, we target 10% with our first check at least. Okay, even if it's a small check, let's say at seed, they're raising $1 million, at 4 million pre, we'll put $500,000 to get that 10%, right? So, and then if they do well, we would double down to get another 10%. And then we will leave us with a little bit more capital to protect that 10% for the follow-on. So that's generally how we do it. But the real check for us is the second check, because it's like, it depends if we come in at seed or A, but generally if we come in at the earlier stages, it's really the second check that counts. But sometimes we've gone in hard from the Series A because we've seen the numbers and we're like, we're going to take a big bet on this company. And then our job is to go get other investors that are value add. If at that point, we don't sort of, it only benefits us to have these investors come in at the later growth rounds where we don't have the capital base to support them.
First of all, I just want to get on the record that says Beko is my favorite venture capital firm in the region.
I know that, I know that, man. I know that.
No, and the reason I use you guys a lot, and conferences since 2016 when we were on panels together. It's because you guys are doers and you've done it, and you're a case study, and you had exits. And so, like, this is why I choose Beko as a, and power to all the other VCs here who are trying to be, like you guys. My question is, again, with the lack of exits we're seeing here, right? There's just, the problem, as I used Kareem as an example, the value was low because of the lack of marketability risk, in the region, which any investment bank will give any company. You just can't exit here, right? That's one. Number two is there are no mega funds. Like now with the struggle that all the decacorns are having, all the big guys, Sequoia, Benchmark, all raised growth funds now, even Andreessen, 2, 3 billion, 6 billion growth funds to support their unicorns that can't go public, right? These don't exist here in the region. So let's say the world is dark in 10 years, okay? And there's just no exit. And you have 3 unicorns in your portfolio like you've, inshallah, predicted, okay? Or hope for. How do you deal with that threat and that risk?
You want the honest answer? I don't think about that. I appreciate that, but I mean, it's just, I have to be an optimist if we're investing in a company that, and the future has to look bright, otherwise, the whole industry is going to collapse. So I totally agree with you. I just think that it's, if we thought about that, then our whole strategy may be less risk focused, which is at the end of the day what we need to be doing, taking more risk.
Well, maybe then everyone here, in every chance they get on stage, should lobby for the government to do mega funds that can help with follow-ons at the later stage.
Yeah.
Right? All of us together just demand, Waha Fund is great, but...
You have Mubadala now.
Right? Mubadala, PIF is coming through, great, good first baby steps, but we want them to be giant steps, inshallah soon.
Inshallah, Habibi.
And thank you.
I don't know how many questions you have. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I have a question, more of a comment as well. I noticed that you guys didn't have IRR listed on there, and I spent some time fundraising with LPs, and there's a lot of question and focus on IRR, given a lot of the private equity backgrounds, a lot of the public market backgrounds of a lot of investors. Maybe you can highlight why you're more focused on the multiple aspect than generating IRR on specific deals, because I think this is sort of something that a lot of the local investors tend to sort of look for that IRR number as a judgment of whether a fund is successful or not. And I think in the venture asset class, that's sort of misconstrued in terms of when IRR should actually be predicted. We sort of commonly say after 5 years, you should look at IRR, but I'm curious at what your stance is on the IRR versus MOIC and multiples that you guys are factoring in.
Look, I think, good question. I mean, for us, the way we look at it is that it's really a 10-year game. It's not like you should expect when you invest in asset class to get your returns at that later stage of that life. So with IRR, it's like if you're driven to potentially exit some of these companies much earlier and to drive up your IRR, your decision making and everything around that is kind of skewed to that number, which I don't think demonstrates, capturing the most kind of value. So we look at money on money just because it's the fairest reflection, and we tell investors 3x we target for the fund, and potentially 20-25% IRR. But the IRR model is not what we're driving for. So I don't know.
I just think it's important that other investors understand that aspect.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm going to ask the final question, or just have a final comment that if you could comment on. I was once told that, especially when I first started in the space, when I took the responsibility for Al-Waha, that when you speak to VCs and they're like talking about their strategies and what they're focused on and sort of what their differentiation, what they do in terms of like their value add, ultimately they don't really know. And no VC or no investor will actually be able to determine. And when they have a strategy, it really doesn't matter. And so, what is your comment to that? You have all of your targets and and everything outlined, but ultimately, how much of that is science, and how much of that is really dependent on the fact that it's a gamble?
Look, I think, let's say the fundamentals should at least for us, the way we look at it is that it's sort of a basis of our strategy. It can evolve, it has to be flexible because there is the art part of it, or at least the unknowns that you have to kind of cater to. You may get companies that, like, for example, like I said with Katopi, when we invested in it through the fund, we didn't realize that in 1 year it's going to be raising and growing at this kind of scale. So I think we think it's scientific at a base level, but we have to be flexible with that thought. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Amir. Thanks, Amir. And while we get the stage ready for our next session, I just wanted to kind of recap on what's going to be happening for the rest of the day. So we have one more session now with two very leading females from the region, Susie Kanu and Noor Suede. And then we'll be, we're running a few minutes behind, so we will have a break and we'll let you know when we'll come back into the room. I'd like to encourage everybody to use this time during the break to network, get to know each other. And then when we come back from the break, we have another exciting panel. And then we will, before we break for lunch, we will have a session where we're going to basically take it off the live stream and allow everybody just to interact and discuss amongst each other. So hopefully you'll be able to, we'll have some leading questions. We have quite a lively group, I think, today, despite, the hours. And then for some of you, I think some of the team have come up to you and told you some of the meetings that have been arranged. A lot of people have asked to meet certain people or vice versa. So that will happen right after or right before the lunch break, I think, right, Demis? Right? Right before the lunch break, yeah. And then you have an afternoon, and then of course in the evening we're going to be bringing you guys and connecting you with the startups for the ending evening reception. So can I please ask my ladies to come on stage, Susie Kanu and Noor Suede, please. Maybe under your picture. So
we have to stand. Hi.
Yeah. Well, thank you, ladies, for joining us. I know both of you run very hectic schedules, so it's actually an honor to have you take some time out of your day to be here. I think, both of you are quite well known to the ecosystem, but just for the sake of those who are here from outside of the ecosystem, if you can just introduce yourself. So maybe we start with Susie and a little bit of your background and kind of what you do.
Hi, I'm Susie Kanu, and I think I'm the latest entry into the tech system that you have in this ballroom. I come from a family business. It's generations old. It started in around 1920. 21 actually is where we have papers, and I've taken over. Actually, I was a disruptor in the family business. Years back, I took over the divisions that were really not doing well. We were in the bottom 20, which is in the automotive division, and I decided to take the challenge and take the challenge, and we are in the top 5 right now. Our revenue, our increase in revenues, over 300+%. So I came through with that challenge, so I'm constantly looking for new challenges, and Arij actually asked me a year ago to be a judge in a tech startup, a Shark Tank for tech, and I loved it. I loved the ideas, I loved it. I started to invest in tech, and I'm a novice at it, so don't ask me too many questions, but I believe in tech, and I think this is the future.
Thanks, Susie. Noor?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. So I come from a family business background as well. I started my career not in family business. I started my career in biotech in Boston as a consultant, and then I moved back to the region in 2005 and joined our family business, which is based in Dubai, in a very traditional sector, so in interior contracting. It couldn't get further away from tech if you tried. And I stayed there for 8 years, scaling, and ultimately we IPO'd in April 2008, so I was fortunate enough to lead that process. Stayed on for 5 more years, working with a lot of family businesses around the world and consolidating the industry. At the same time, I was fortunate enough to start my own little company, which was a yoga studio. Again, couldn't get further away from tech, but it was the first one in Dubai. And so experienced firsthand how hard it was to be an entrepreneur at the same time as running a billion-dollar company. And ultimately started helping other entrepreneurs because I just thought it was so hard. And I was fortunate enough to be in a position to mentor and to angel invest, and that got closer and closer to tech. And now running a VC firm, and that transpired from our family office. So post DAPA days, which was our family business, when we exited completely in 2013, I set up the family office, and then got into venture, because every deal we would do as a family office, there were 3 or 4 other families that would say, whatever you do, we'll do. And I wasn't taking enough, I guess, I wasn't doing enough diligence to take that responsibility. So I decided I wanted to set up a structure where we were doing enough work to take that responsibility. Yeah.
Great, thank you, and thank you both for that great introduction. I think I would have tried to introduce you guys this well, but it would be very difficult for me. Susie, I mean, I've known you for quite a long time, and we always have these discussions about, when is the right time to invest in technology. We've had these discussions or debates on family offices and, when family offices will actually see the light. But then, you always come back to me and, you challenge me back when I speak, from my perspective as to whether it's the right time for family offices. And then the VCs might complain and they might raise their hand and say, no family office actually invests in tech, and, their processes are so long and they don't understand. So why is it? I mean, you've kind of disrupted, and you've disrupted this model, but if I'm a VC and I'm coming to a family office, maybe give us that perspective, how easy it is, and how did you get yourself to get into tech investing?
I got into tech investing on my own before actually going back to my family business. Because the issue or the background of family business is that they're conservative. We've created a legacy, and we want that legacy to continue. So we don't want too much disruption there. And we're held accountable. If we start to invest in startups and they start to fail, we're the ones who are held accountable. So it's conservative. The mentality is conservative. And don't forget, the leader of the family business tends to be an older person. So when the singularity comes in their lectures and they say we've got to update our leadership, they're completely right. We've got to invest in new leaders and new mentality. So it's very hard to convince an older chairman that you need to diversify into technology or innovation. Now, saying that, a lot of family businesses right now have percentages where they're investing in innovation. But my 2 cents worth, if I can say, is that if anyone is targeting a family business, is to start low. Don't come in with huge high numbers and ask for high numbers. Is to start low and let them see how their money is increasing, or the value of the money and their value of the investment is actually increasing. Once you go really high, they cringe and they move backwards. Because don't forget, you don't have many exits again, in this region. You have, if I'm correct, you have Kareem, you have Souk, you have Talabat, and that's less than 5 billion. So we don't have many exits to talk about. So it's true, we need to invest in technology. We need to change the mentality of family business, that we don't have to have the family name on the building anymore. We should be on websites. We should be internationally recognized. We should be tied to new technology, and not just on a building, a local building. So that's what, personally, that's what made me start to invest on my own. When I did, my family business followed. And then obviously, this is in a local business, and then in a Silicon Valley business, no. When I started an SPV, actually, most of the businesses around me followed. And yeah.
So, I mean, that's interesting that you say that most of the people sort of kind of followed. So do you think that sometimes they need to find a trusted partner? Would you say a VC, needs to believe in somebody? I mean, is it the same way? I mean, as an investor, do you need to believe in the as a family office, you need to believe in an investor, much like how a VC, when they look at a startup, they need to believe in the people? Is that what you...
I think you always, in every business, in everything, you need to have a leader to take a role. And if it's a family business, if you see other family businesses come and enter, then all of a sudden you see everyone piggybacking, you know, if another family business that you trust starts to enter. And this SPV that I started from Silicon Valley, actually it was Fahad who brought it to me and advised me on it, but many followed behind me, but I didn't target the owners of the family businesses, by the way. I went through the generation like me, the CEOs, the family business people, but they were the, you know, well, I'm first in charge, but my age group. And they immediately joined. So there is an appetite, but sometimes maybe you're targeting the wrong person in the firm for the appetite. And sometimes if you just start off in a smaller amount, you will get by far more liquidity coming in.
Thanks, Susie. Noor, I mean, how was your experience? Would you say that it was similar? The fact that, you know, you also started a family office and now are, you know, leading a tech VC firm. How did that happen? And, you know, how were you able to sort of change that mindset? You know, because this is like years of work and, you know, a business that you built together as a family, and now are you just gambling the money away, or what is it? You know, what are the thoughts that way?
So I think that, you know, Susie is right. I started first by saying, okay, well, I'll put in $50,000 personally. And the second that I said that, you know, you had my brother, my father, my cousins, everyone was like, wait, if you're going to put your own hard-earned money into this, and you're not asking us to foot the bill, then what are you seeing that we're missing? And that became the first question within the family, and the cousins, and everyone, and then other families. And like I said, and it simply evolved that I was just investing based on the opportunities that would come my way that I would believe in. And then there would be more and more people around us that would want to invest and would set up 1, 2, 3, 4 SPVs. And it wasn't structured. It was literally opportunistic based on things that I thought had high potential, and some of them have done very well and some haven't done as well. I think as time progressed and I got more into the venture space, the family office became fully philanthropic. So we decided that as a family, we were very fortunate and we wanted to set up a family office that was fully philanthropic towards people who needed it a lot more than we did. And as that was happening and I was helping to structure that and get that rolling, I ended up in government for almost 2 years as the CIO at the Dubai Future Foundation, trying to create more ecosystem impact with an investment thesis that never properly materialized, to someone's earlier point on government involvement. Once both of those missions had been accomplished and the family office became fully philanthropic and the Future Foundation, you know, the accelerator and all these other things had materialized but not the investment strategy, I decided to start this fund almost 2 years ago with a very specific thesis. The thesis was, one of the biggest learnings I've had was spending 8 years in family business and spending 7 years as an entrepreneur, and that there's a massive disconnect. And so you see the family businesses, as Susie mentioned, and being led by people who are very, very entrenched in deep industry. And these tech entrepreneurs being people who are very optimistic and hopeful and speaking languages, and they just completely miss each other. And so I said, okay, well, I happen to sit between these people and those people. So how can I build something where the family businesses feel useful, where they can relate, where it's actually about their business? So this is how this came about. My family business and family office network is quite substantial in the region and internationally. And I thought, okay, well, if we invest in companies that are predominantly B2B tech, so these businesses can actually help us diligence. This network can become revenue generating for the portfolio. And they can tell us, yes, this works in logistics, no, it doesn't, because they're the logistics experts from the old industry, and this is going to disrupt them, or this can be useful for them. And so that was the thesis on global ventures. And we are helping these companies grow globally, regionally through the Family Business Network, globally through our extensive network. We've done now 7 investments. I would say our LPs are mainly family businesses and family offices around the region, and a lot of international US-based investors that have deep industry expertise. And so we're going more industry focused rather than B2C focused, with the thesis on, we want to engage the family businesses and family offices. It doesn't take a lot of money. Like you said, it can be much smaller numbers than originally, but even with $1 million, because they're taking that risk, you have their attention. So suddenly you have their capital, they want to help you diligence the company, they want to be around the table, they'll do the co-invest on the next round, and getting them involved and engaged is a lot more important and valuable to the founders than the quantum that they're investing into our fund.
Thanks, Noor. I had a, we were recently in a session, and maybe, Susie, you can speak to that. You've recently been appointed as a chairman of one of the regional...
Chairwoman.
Sorry, chairwoman of one of the regional tech companies here in Bahrain. In the region, sorry. And then, when do you draw a line? Because, everyone talks about value add, and then especially since both of you come from like industry experience, you're running a company as CEO. When do you draw the line between becoming too micromanaging and trying to tell a company what to do and what's the right process and what's not the wrong process? And when is it okay? Where's the line drawn between how much value add or opinions you give and how much you're supposed to stand back as an investor, especially when you come from an industry and more traditional background?
Well, I think one of the reasons why I mentored them and I sat with them is because they liked the feedback that I was giving them. So they asked me to invest with them. And after investing with them, they realized that there is value added. Now, I don't know how technology works. I just think that the idea that they have, I thought the idea that they had was just fantastic. It was such a simple idea. Skip Lino, it's a queuing system. Who could have thought of something so simple, There's no competition to it. The competition's archaic, it's the numbers. So it's just an app that is used in 190 countries around the world. What business could I have developed in 1 year where I could have had that reach in 190 countries? Now, they need from me something that probably, I don't know if I can say they like. It's live stream, so please skip. I know you guys are great. You're lacking nothing, but I can help them with the business style, the business approach, and I think that is it. And also value added with the people that they could actually meet in different countries. And but they're doing great. They have double-digit growth, and the way actually. It really crashes our system of finances and all the balance sheets that we understand how to work with. Is in tech, it's just growth. That's all you guys talk about is growth, 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 growth. For me in family business, I'm like, hey, slow down. I want yields. I need to see profits. I need to see profits every year. In tech, it's growth, growth. So I'm learning from them. They're learning from me because I am pulling sometimes the rein. But they're doing great. I found that they had the capabilities. The founders could execute the dream. And that is what I invested in. And they are so far. And I hope I'm adding and I'm helping them. I guess I am because they called me, they asked me to be chairwoman. Sorry. So, no, I'm just kidding, yeah. So I hope I am, but in the Silicon Valley one, obviously I won't have as much control. It's a venture capital. I have a startup where I have not full control, but I have direct control, and the other one I won't have control. But I can learn, but I'm happy to learn. It will take years, I understand that. Family business, we need quick return. We want quick return. So being patient isn't really part of the game. If I bought land, I can sell it in a year. It will appreciate. I can sell it. If I bought a building, I get rent. Now in these investments that I'm doing, I'm just basically sitting and waiting and watching. So let's see how it goes.
Thanks, Susie. Noor, maybe you can comment on that. So, you're running a VC firm. You built company, which is the yoga studio out of Dubai. So, you probably enjoy building things, right? So building a firm, building things. So how are you able to sort of control yourself from, micromanaging the startups you invest in? And, what are your views on that? Should a VC be an asset manager? Should a family office that invests just focus on supporting the VC or the startup? Or are you really supposed to get involved in the day-to-day operations?
So I think it varies from company to company and from founder to founder. Generally, my thesis is that it's their company. So we try to help, we try to get involved. As Susie said, we're privileged to have positions to be able to do so. We're privileged to be able to do this role and this job. And at the end of the day, it's their company. And if you're investing in the company, you're investing in the founder, you're investing in their vision, you're investing in their company. I come from a family business background where we ultimately sold our stake even post-IPO. So since 2013, we haven't owned a single share in what was once the family business and the dream of the family, right? So letting go is something that we have to coach the founders to do. But in the meantime, it's their business and their dream. So my perspective on adding value is we are very value add as an investor. We get very involved with the founders that want us involved. And we try to make that call before we invest in the company. So we'll work with the founders for 3 months, sometimes 4 months. We're very fortunate in this part of the world where it doesn't take 4 days for founders to raise a round. It takes them about 4 months, sometimes 6 months, 9 months. And so we have the ability to track them, to see are they coachable, to see if you jive, to see if they believe you can add value, to see is it strategic capital for them or just capital. In other parts of the world, you know, here's a term sheet, you have a week, if you're not signing it, you're out of the round. Here it's a much longer journey. It's like venture capital was in the US in the 70s. Right. And so being able to follow founders along that path for a few months and then make a decision, by the time you've made the decision, you should know, right? How much do they want you involved, and does that work for you?
Great, thanks. I mean, I think something that, you know, some of the VCs also struggle with. So Susie was saying, you know, when you come to knock on a door of a family office, don't give them like, you know, the opportunity of large check sizes, come small. You know, Noor, you said that, you know, you did your first sort of $50,000, you know, dollar investment. And then, you know, Susie, when you first decided to write your first check, maybe if each one of you can give us, you know, what kind of tipped you over the edge, you know, other than the fact that you felt that, you know, technology was the future. What was the approach that you probably didn't see in some of the other people who came to ask for money that you saw in the first people that actually convinced you?
Well, I'm a bit biased. When I work, I have to enjoy where I work, with whom I work, or else it's just not worth it for me. I have to enjoy the journey. So when I met Skip Lino at the tech conference, at the tech judge Shark Tank thing, I just found the concept was so interesting, and I knew that I had to get into tech. You know, I've been in enough conferences around the world where all they talk about is disruption. You know, we're going to be dinosaurs if we don't adapt, and which is completely true. So I said, I have to learn. I have to really push myself, and I have to learn. So I did, and I called them in many times. I went, I saw their offices. I liked their offices. The programmers are all Bahraini. It's amazing, you know, all Bahrainis and women as well. So it was amazing what I saw, and I was just so impressed, and I liked their passion, and that tipped me. I said, listen, there's no way they can, you know, fail. I've got to start. I've got to try tech. New businesses fail. What is the rate of new business failure? It's over 80%. So, I mean, hopefully, this tech isn't going to fail. I see it just growing. And I just said, I've got to adapt, because we've also got to adapt inside our family businesses. You know, we're agents. Most family businesses are agents of something. So we really need to understand that sooner or later, there are not going to be any more agencies around. So we have to also adapt into new methods, into new styles of working. If the family business is not going to accept it, then maybe we should have an adjacent, what do they call them? A disruption company. I think they, you know, slash it's innovation. You can call it innovation. But you should have an adjacent one that sooner or later is going to grow bigger than that old family business tradition. But we have to get involved. We're not going to, tomorrow in my business, they're going to be automated cars. Tomorrow the dealer's probably going to sell online everything directly without needing me. So I've got to start to adapt to the new style of business. And if I don't, I will be a dinosaur. And not just my name on the building.
So Noor, maybe you can follow up to what, you know, Susie was saying. So she needs to adapt as a family office. And so how do you think venture can help, you know, family offices actually adapt? And to your point, how can it help your family office adapt to what's happening in the world?
So venture's a very big space. I think in the region, we see as a firm about 20 opportunities a week. So when I was doing this more independently, I thought I saw everything. I think a lot of family offices think they see everything in their vertical, and I was seeing about 5 or 6 deals a week. Now I'm seeing 20. I think I'm seeing everything. I'm probably not seeing everything. But it takes a team. It takes diligence. And I think that, you know, we work with some of our the families that have invested in our fund, and they've said, you know, anything that comes your way within our industry, send to us. You like it, you don't like it, it's too early, it's too late, it's too rich, it's the wrong geography. We have a mandate as a fund, but for them, they have a mandate on their industry. So they want to stay ahead of the curve. They want to know what's happening everywhere. So some of them are, very interested in health. Everything that we get in health tech just goes to these two LPs, whether or not, it works for us. And it goes with a big, in capital letters, we have not done diligence on this company, but you asked, so here you go. So we act as a filter, we act as a funnel. We think that that's half the reason they made the investments. But it's very useful to them. I also think that it's a learning opportunity as we run through diligence, as we run through valuations, as we work with founders. They get to come along in that process and that journey. They have access to co-invest. They can look at our diligence. They can learn about tech specifically and tech investing specifically. So I think it works for everyone. And we get industry knowledge. So when we look at something in a space where there's a family business that's been in the industry for 20, 30, 80 years, we call them and say, we're looking at something in your space. We want to know what you think. So it's a symbiotic relationship. It works for everybody. And I think that's the right approach for family offices. I think that it's nice to think that just because you're in an industry, you see everything. But the reality is that most founders think of you as competition, and they're actually trying to disrupt you. So the smartest founders are not going to come to you if you're in a vertical, especially if they're in your vertical.
Can I add something? Yeah. One of the other tipping points was that I piggybacked off institutions that started to invest, because institutions actually did all the due diligence for me. In the Silicon Valley one, it was Al-Waha. In the local one, it was Kuwait Finance House. So they did all the due diligence. It took them months, I'm sure, to do it. It's something that I couldn't probably do in a couple of weeks. So that made me feel by far more comfortable when I got the thumbs up. So when I got the thumbs up, I said, that's it. I'm investing. I'm going to take a chance. And I'm very happy.
So do you think that, I see a lot of nods and people smiling, so maybe, get the audience engaged with me. But does that, just before we open it up, so do you think, your point of diligence or understanding the verticals that different, your families that are invested in you, but do you think if a VC comes to you with a proposition to invest, or in your case, when, you are pitching to other family offices as a VC, do you think the fact that you can be very candid and transparent about your due diligence process, about the information you're willing to share, does that help you get money from family offices? And Susie said for her, as long as she sees the due diligence is being done, it makes her feel comfortable. So on the flip side, what's your experience?
So my experience is always that transparency and the more information you give is better, as long as the person isn't inundated. So we provide full access to our data room and our diligence and everything about each investment and our investment memos to all of our LPs. And sometimes someone will come back and say, we heard you were looking at this company, but you didn't do it. Why? And then we'll provide that due diligence as well. So and this just comes from personal experience. So I used to run regulatory compliance when we were a public company listed in London, right? And there here's the level of diligence and the compliance and how much you share with your investors. And I've simply said, okay, well, if that's best practice on a fiduciary responsibility perspective in public markets, why should it not be the same for private markets? And that's literally the position that we've taken.
Great, thank you. I'd like to open it up to the floor. Anyone would like, I saw some nods and questions, but can you just remind me, sorry, questions? Go ahead.
Fahad would have a question.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you very much. This was very enlightening. Both come from similar family office backgrounds and decided to take the leap of faith into venture. I just have a question, and it's applied to both ladies. Whether Noor, the first 50,000 you wrote, or Susie, the check you wrote in either the VC funds or the Skiplino or the other investments you've done. Did you decide to, first did you allocate a budget? I'm going to allocate 100,000 this year and see how it goes. Do you have did you go through this the structured banking way that private banks teach you how to manage your money? Or how'd you do it?
I wish I could tell you that, I had a structure, I had an innovation group that said, we're going to allocate this much money. Well, in this case, no, I actually didn't. I just thought that This was something reasonable for me to put down, and then this was something reasonable for the company to put down, and also in the other fund, the same thing. I didn't have an actual structure when I started, no.
So I didn't have a structure either. You know, it's like when you see a new dish on the table and you decide you're going to taste it first and then decide how much of your plate to allocate to it depending on how much you like it. I think that was kind of how you approach any new asset class. I think my perspective was more, you know, I was taking a look at where can I add value in the ecosystem. I was getting approached by more and more entrepreneurs. It seemed to me that 5 minutes of my time and a few phone calls, as I'm sure is the case with you, could probably save them a lot of time and effort. And then I had to be careful about how to allocate that time because that's everyone's, you know, most limited resource. So I just saw more and more increasing number of them in tech. Tech is something, I learned how to code when I was 8, so a very long time ago, and I stayed coding throughout college. I was the teacher's assistant for all the coding classes, though I was studying finance. So for me, tech isn't scary. It wasn't scary 10 years ago. It's not scary now. I can't code anymore, but I can, you know, pretty thoroughly look at a stack and figure out how scalable it is. So for me, it's something where I've always been close. I've always been interested. I've always been relatively competent, although it hasn't been the business I've been in family business. So that was something where I was happier to take risks because it's something I'm close to and something where I saw a massive opportunity and something where I could add a lot of value. But the first check was, this makes sense. I really like the founder. As someone earlier mentioned, I think it was Amir, who, you know, he's not sitting having 3 coffees back to back, you know, he's actually going and running his business, and I'd love to be involved and support if I can. And then the next one, and then when the third one happened, I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need a structure and a strategy and a portfolio allocation and the rest of it. But it took the first one, the second one, and then it made sense to actually think through it more holistically.
Great, thank you. I know a lot of the people here are either raising or just closed their fund or are about to raise. So, you know, these are the people you can get money from. So I'm surprised nobody's asking and attacking them.
Thank you,
Any more questions? They're going to come talk to you guys in the break, so I'm going to ask you a question. I just, you know, I always get this comment. You know, I always get this comment about how, you know, ultimately they feel that, you know, family offices, especially in the region, don't believe in any of the funds in the region. And, you know, Noor, you're actually now a fund, so maybe you can talk about your experience. But ultimately, you know, Susie, you know, you just said you invested in a fund in Silicon Valley. So when will you actually believe in the funds in the region? And what's missing right now that, you know, some of these funds that are raising here don't really have in place that makes you as a family office, you know, protecting the legacy, trying to disrupt what's happening, and, you know, what are they missing?
She asked you, but
yeah, first Susie and then...
Well, I did invest. My first investment was in a local.
But that's a startup, but the funds.
I just started investing. I prefer to. I've been in business for too many generations. I prefer to invest in Silicon Valley right now because I think the managers of the fund have more experience. And I think it's the first time I venture into it. So I prefer to venture into something that's been tried and tested. Now, that says nothing, there's nothing wrong with obviously investing in local funds. But like I said, there's not enough exits, there's not enough excitement yet. But hopefully there will be.
And so you think that will make it easier for you, you know, to be comfortable as you protect your family office legacy? So there is like there is a reason behind it. It's not just that you're
there is a reason behind it. I mean, I need to, you know, I have shareholders. I need to go back and I need to say, yes, they've exited, they've done this, this is the numbers. I can't just walk in and say, I like this and, you know, let's do this. No, it depends on who their advisors are. It depends, you know, it's a business also at the end of the day, where to invest. So there's a track record as well. So if I'm starting to invest, I do need to invest there, but I've also invested here, so I'm not biased in any way, yeah.
Noor, how did you feel as you were fundraising? And, you know, I mean, I don't know if I can say this publicly, but, you know, how many of your investors are actually from the region and how many of them are international?
So I would say about almost 60% of our investors are not from the region. So we started trying to raise in the region, and we see every deal anyway, why should we be paying you fees? we're better positioned to make judgment calls on deals because we know what's suitable in our industry and what's not. Our operating assets are all in the region, so when we invest, we want to invest internationally to diversify. All these reasons make sense. And we want to invest with managers who have a longer track record. So the feedback I was hearing was really, we like the space, we believe in tech in the region, but we're not going to give you capital anyway. And so, and we don't think that we should give you or anyone else capital for that matter, because you're not adding value. So we took a step back, and I went back to, the 2 other times I'd raised money successfully in my life. And when we IPO'd, we raised $790 million in 2 weeks. We had Morgan Stanley and UBS behind us. And I remember running that roadshow and taking every meeting, and I remember our hit rates. And so I went back, and it was 11 years ago. It was in 2008. And I had a chat with the president of Morgan Stanley at the time, who was our biggest supporter. And I said, where did this money come from? And he said it was 88% London and New York. So I said, great. So I got on a plane, and I went back to London and New York, and I said, here I can add value. Here's a part of the world that you don't have access to, where multiples are still lower than international multiples, which are way out of whack. And we are a new manager, but guess what? So is everyone else. And I'm going to show you stuff you would never see otherwise. And every deal that we bring to the table, and here's 7 deals we want to do, which were our first, 4 of our first 7 deals were from that pool, is either innovation you don't have access to because it's solving emerging market problems that you don't even know about, or emulation, and you know the $6 billion comp, so you can help us scale this company. And then we got about a 60% hit rate. But I was talking to people who were very familiar with tech. So we got the founders of General Catalyst to invest, we got the founders of Riverwood Capital, the top VC firms in the US, in London. Their founders were all like, we totally get it. You're doing what we did 30 years ago. Great, let's get involved. So literally I had to go somewhere where people believed I was adding value. Then I came back to the region. And then people said, oh wait, these smart people who have track records and years of experience are behind you. Now we have faith. So I said, that's great. I'm happy to take your capital as well as your industry expertise because it can add a lot of value to the portfolio. And that's how we put together the fund. We think of our LPs the same way we advise founders to think about their cap tables. Where do you want to be in 5 years, and who can help you get there? And that's kind of how we thought about it.
Great. I mean, if I can say, sort of summarize my key takeaways from this discussion, is that, I think for family offices, there's still an element of having to try to protect the hard work that's been built over the years. But ultimately, it's that you need to build trust on both sides. So, for Noor's case, where she was trying to fundraise, she realized that if she needed to build trust, she needed to get the backing of people who've done this before, and then come back and pitch, the family office. And I think in Susie's case is that, these VCs in the region need to at least show some success for them to build that trust, for her to go back to her shareholders and her stakeholders to showcase that this is happening. So if I was a VC that's coming to knock on these family office doors, or if I was starting my fund and trying to pitch to some family offices, I would try to formulate my pitch to showcase how I can gain that trust, how to showcase what really means for a family office, and how I can help them. But ultimately, and it goes back to what I was trying to tell Emir, nobody knows the right answer, right? But we're all trying to do that. So I think when we're transparent about the fact that we have a strategy, we've done this before, we can add value, we have some people that are backing us, and but we're on this journey together because this is a new region, this is a new space, and nobody actually knows the final answer because things can change on the way. So I want to thank both Susie and Noor for joining us today. And we're actually all women on the panel. We try not to, just in case nobody noticed. But I think it's also interesting to say that it's no longer just a male-dominated world in this space. I think we have great females that are leading the space, both on the VC side and on the family office side, into technology. And I think it's just showcasing the fact that this is an evolving ecosystem. And I'm very proud to see 2 great women leading in this space, and it's hope for all of us and a lot of the women in this room. And so thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who are too shy to ask us women on the panel any questions, lucky enough, there's a break right now, and so please take advantage of speaking to all the panelists. And thanks again. Thank you. So we're on a break right now. I know we're a little bit behind time. Chris might scream at me during the break, but you have now time to speak to your moderator who's here. So the coffee break is on this side. Please enjoy the coffee, light snacks. We also have space for you smokers to smoke on a balcony out here. And so we'll be back in 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. No? Okay, great, thanks. So if we can get everyone just to get seated again. Hope you enjoyed the break. We're just, a little bit behind time, but we're gonna try to basically make this session a little bit shorter and then cut the venting session a little bit. But we're excited to welcome the next panel that will be moderated by Noor Suede. If I can find the moderator, is she here? No? Girls, can you find Noor for me? But on the panel is Jahan. Right? Aren't you on the panel? You are. You are, yes. And Joel and Chris Rogers from Lumia Capital. So maybe if I can get you guys all and maybe try to leave this seat for Noor so she can be, and then have Jahan in the middle between the two men. Joel, maybe sit here so you can be under your photo. Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so Noor is just gonna be coming here. So we're gonna be, understanding exit paths. For Chris, who missed the first half of today, Chris, a lot of the discussion was around how there's no exits in the region. So, Noor is gonna come up and moderate this, but she'll tell you a little bit more.
Thank you. Thank you, Arish. Well, I'm delighted to sit in the moderator chair as opposed to being asked the questions. It's a lot more fun to ask the questions now. For the audience, I know you all, but it would be great if for the audience, if you don't mind, each of you introducing yourselves briefly and what you currently do. Joel?
All right. Hey guys, Joel Yala. I am the co-founder and partner at Class 5, which is an emerging markets focused venture fund. And previously was with this guy.
You were smiling about it.
Jehan Chu from Kinetic. We're a Hong Kong-based blockchain fund investing in early stage companies in both equity and, I guess we'll get around to it, but cryptocurrencies and tokens as well.
Hi, Chris Rogers. I'm a partner at Lumia Capital, and we are primarily U.S. Investing VC based out of San Francisco, but we do some investing in this region. I've been doing business in the region for 20 plus years, having come here first to Saudi to do a joint venture with a company in the U.S. I co-founded, which was called Nextel.
Thank you. So I think our panel has been shrunken to 30 minutes, of which there are 28 left. So we'll dive right into it. Across your portfolios, as you think about investing, at what point do you think about exiting? Is that before you make the investment, during, or do you think that in 5 years the industry will look so different and whenever it happens, it happens?
Sure. I mean, I think it's something that's constantly on our mind. And initially, when you make a decision, it's something you think about. You think about the TAM, but you also think about, you know, what could this company be worth and what does that look like for the fund and for LPs. But then you kind of graduate to this relationship with your startup, which is thinking about how to enable that over the long term. It's not something that is always top of mind. I think people have said, you know, great companies are built, no, they're not sold. But I think it is important to build those relationships, help the companies, you know, build relationships with potential acquirers, and, you know, be able to navigate those networks, which is, you know, hopefully where, you know, VCs can step in and help with that. So it's something that's important, and, you know, you always obviously have to kind of build those relationships over time. So I would say it's a never-ending process.
Would you agree, Jehan?
I'm probably the least experienced here as far as equity investments because we've done around 120 deals in the past 3 years. And when I told that to an institutional investor from a foundation, they said, "You're not so selective, are you?" And I said, "Actually, I am. It's just that what I'm investing in are cryptocurrencies and utility tokens, which is a completely new type of asset to be investing in, where you're really backing companies, the utility, and they're literally selling the kind of utility of the token itself as opposed to equity. So there's a whole different style of investing where you're optimizing not just for the kind of business, but also for the liquidity, where I can have liquidity in one of these companies within 3 months. And so you make different types of calculations about how much diligence you do and how well you know, because you have an earlier exit. And it's a different style of investing. I know it sounds crazy, and it's definitely new, but where we're going is somewhere in the middle, where there's things called digital assets and security tokens, where equity ownership will start to be kind of cut into smaller slices, and you will have earlier liquidity. So I think we get to that point.
So you don't think about exits in the traditional way, and you don't plan for them in the traditional VC way then?
For pure equity investments, I do. We do invest just like everybody else in pure equity, but we also have another style of investing in different forms of assets like security tokens, where we think about liquidity rather than exits. There are companies that we've sold out that we go back into because there's market liquidity.
Makes sense. Chris, in your opinion, does the stage at which a VC thinks about the exit vary depending on where they are in the investment ecosystem, seed versus A's? And does it vary geographically?
Yes and yes. I think because we tend to focus on early growth stage, so that would look more like a Series B.
Here or in the U.S.? Because the Series B varies a
well,
little
I mean,
bit.
yeah. So we'll use that generally. I think we certainly have to be looking at that because the timeline should be closer. I think there's also, as you were really interestingly talking about in the earlier session, the idea of your money goes where you can add value. Our inbound, our deal flow is very much associated with some expertise in exits. Just because I'm old, I happen to have had a big exit, but I've also had decades of M&A. And so when founders come to me and are looking for value add, it's one of the categories that they're putting a big check next to. So in a way, that's a bit self-selecting. And so it has to be that we are thinking about it.
And so if you look across the world, 70% of VC exits are actually industry M&A. Where does that factor into how a VC firm builds out their network? Should they be more industry focused in order to enable exits for their portfolio? Or do you think just being broad works?
Sure, I'm happy to take the first swing at that. I think, yeah, the reality is most of these exits are about, 100 to 200 million if they go well. And then, as Amir mentioned, the home runs are the big ones. But I think when you think about that ecosystem and how that plays out, you really have to kind of build these relationships and help enable the companies be on their kind of radar earlier, right? So if you look at who's been acquiring globally very aggressively, it's folks like Uber, it's folks like Walmart, Ant Financial, Tencent. So, I think founders have a lot on their plate already. So as a VC, I think enabling those relationships, getting them on their radar early, whether they're investing in the company or just having a chat, those things do help down the line. So, I think part of it is you have to kind of put them on their radar and develop it over time.
And Chris, how early should you put them on the radar? So if you have a founder who's doing a Series B and you know that a potential acquirers are this, that, and the other person, how soon do you put the founder in front of this, that, and the other?
Well, so that's a bit of a nuanced situation because you also have to assess the founder and the team. And to me, not every founding team is prepared to be sitting in front of a potential acquirer, even if that acquisition is a couple of years away, one. And they may not be the long-term person to run that company. Two, they are often so easily distracted by the allure of that it really can take away from the important day-to-day decisions that might get them the Series C round, let alone the acquisition. And so I think that's a very delicate balance, and I tend to shy away from a lot of personal interaction between the teams and the companies, because when the time is right, that's going to happen. That doesn't mean don't bring awareness to them. That's just, do we really need to dig in and meet the team?
And Jihan, in Asia, I mean, the perception in my limited experience working there is more similar to the region in terms that it's very relationship-based, more so than perhaps in the American culture, which is still relationship-based, but it takes a much longer time to build those relationships. Do you think that when you talk to founders about potential exits, just in the traditional sense, that it makes sense to do that earlier, later, hold back until they're perfectly ready, or start building the relationship in years in advance?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, especially in Asia, where so many of the kind of major enterprises and major conglomerates are family-run. There's a parallel with this region. I think that generally, earlier is better because the best acquirer is the best user. So it's best if these types of conglomerates have a use for the actual technology and can grow into it. So by the time that they're ready to consider acquisition, they're already, ideally one of the best customers, and it's really just a kind of seamless type of move. So I don't think it's ever too early because really you want them as that customer, at least for that level of kind of conglomerate that we often see in China and Hong Kong and kind of Singapore and all these regions. So I think having the founder understand that rather than, hey, this is a potential exit or potential acquire, like we don't really have that conversation. It's more, go get that business and good luck.
And I would say the region's very similar. About 45%, and Philip's here to correct my number, of the exits that happen in the region are actually by regional acquirers. So I think that in the region it's also about building the relationship, it's about harnessing that. And we do have exits. I can't remember the number, and I'm sure Philip will share the number. But I think that the M&A that happens here is smaller in the tickets. What's missing is really the IPO experience. So I think that there's a lot of buzz around IPOs, and we don't have IPOs, and how do we create an IPO market and the rest of it. I think in France this year so far there have been 0 tech IPOs. In Germany this year so far there have been 0 tech IPOs. In the region this year so far, there have been 0 tech IPOs. So I don't think of IPOs as the be-all and end-all. What do you think about the IPO dream of the founder as a prospective exit? And how do you see the region sitting in that space?
Well, I think the dream is a perfectly fine dream. And that dream generally aligns with almost any type of exit. And so, great. We are seeing dramatic changes. Your focus is a great example on the alternative ways that capital is being recognized and deployed. And so to think that this market might not be a hub for IPOs in 5 years is probably mistaken, but we don't know. So it's a perfectly good goal. I think a single goal exit strategy is fraught with danger. So it always has to be among the many, but it is one that people tend to sort of romanticize it as a liquidity event for their employees and everyone. Now we're sitting in markets right now where the drama of that story is very apparent, where you're seeing. Most people don't think about the lockup afterwards. Most people don't think about what happens when a lockup is over, and the ups and downs of that are very compelling if you understand them. Most employees think about their exit, they think they're rich, then they can't spend it, but they want to spend it, they start spending it, in some way, shape, or form, maybe through the form of debt, and then lockup expires and the stock craters and they feel like, oh my gosh, I got to grab liquidity. And then your employee base is very distressed. This is not a good experience for them, even though if they'd been prepared for it, they'd be saying, wow, that was upside. But they buy into another dream of that. So that is, I think, really the most complicated one. And then we've also seen how traditional venture-backed companies and their growth metrics don't directly align normally with public market investors. And it doesn't really say anything about the quality of the business, it just talks about a valuation difference, and that also comes as a rude awakening. So certainly the IPO, I think with all these storylines, is going to become less the holy grail.
Thank you. I want to move a little bit into the founder. So as we invest in founders, and I say it's all about the management team and the founders, and then we provide them capital, hopefully strategic capital, so they can grow, and then they get to a point of exiting. And this panel is supposed to be all about exiting. How do you coach a founder through that? Because most founders are very passionate about their businesses. We like to think they're not attached to them. But how do you coach a founder to, okay, now it's time to let go, and this is a good time, and this is enough? Joel?
That's an interesting question. I do think you're right. A lot of times the founder themselves or the founders are like, well, what am I supposed to do after this sells? And it becomes this long kind of conversation of, well, what's next? But I think there's different scenarios that end up happening which kind of dictate how to do that and how to coach the founders through that. There's good scenarios where you can go public, or there's a trade sale that happens that's very attractive. I think at that point you always have to have a very kind of candid conversation between the founders, the board, the investors, and understanding what's best for the shareholders, the employees, and all that. And those are the conversations that should be happening constantly, right? If they're not happening at every board meeting, then there's a mismatch between those two, right? So I think it should be something that shouldn't come as a shock value when there's an offer that makes sense. Now, the other scenario is the downside scenario, and that happens a lot. Most of us will have a lot of companies that go through life cycles where you have to fire sell the asset or find a good home for it. And those are tougher conversations, to be honest. Those are conversations where you either have to, as a group, find a good outcome for the company, or get the founder to realize this is the best way to create value for the shareholders in the company. And those are ones where you end up having much more sudden movements to make that exit happen. So those are tend to be the less glamorous ones, but where as a VC and a board, you really have to step up and help the founder really find that exit and make sure you preserve value.
And Jihan, you mentioned earlier that a lot of times the family businesses in an industry become clients for these founders, and that's a way to get in and start thinking about the value they're adding. Do you think that provides entrepreneurs with a competitive disadvantage sometimes when it comes to wanting to exit, perhaps to another family that's in the same industry, and the one that's already their client might have more information? Do you think there's any conflicts there? I mean, we face this in the region where sometimes we have family offices that want to invest in a certain company, and the entrepreneur will say no, because then if they're my investor or they're my client, I'm not going to get this other much larger or much more important or much more diversified or simply other family office involved with me.
Well, we haven't really seen that to be a problem so far. But one example I have is we invested in a small seed stage company called Liquify. What they do is they create security tokens. So they work with companies to tokenize assets. And we like them because they have a partnership with one of the largest, well, actually the largest industrial real estate holder in Hong Kong. And it was the son, the second generation chairman of the group, who was looking towards the future and wanted to find liquidity for a lot of these very kind of locked up assets they had in terms of the real estate. They invested, and what we found was that because of the family relationships and the relationships between the families, there were other real estate kind of holders and conglomerates and families who saw that as like a positive signal and wanted to come in and collaborate because they saw that it was being done. They saw someone take that first step, and it was quite a validator. Whether that will kind of prevent some type of like exit to one or the other, hard to say. I mean, I would love to have that problem in a few years' time, but I think that at least for our area where a lot of the technologies are consortium-based in terms of how they get adopted, we may not have that much of an issue. But that might be specific
Chris,
to
what do you
blockchain.
think? Do you think strategic alliances can be dangerous for exits?
Absolutely. But I was actually going to go back to your earlier question about the coaching the founders, because I think there are a lot of issues there. And one of the first issues is that we're all using the word plural, founders. And so often you have multiple people in a company, and at the end of the day, usually one is running the show, not a team-based running. It might be a good management team, but one is sort of called out as the CEO. And so you see differing views on when and how and if we should exit, and I think that's something boards have to be really sensitive to. And then you have differing goals, and that's where I think boards often insert themselves perhaps a little bit too much. I mean, if you're taking venture capital, then you know that you've put your company under pressure to exit within a certain timeline, which reflects the fund life. So that's the trade-off you make. But within that timeline, there's a lot of sensitivity, and I wouldn't normally sort of tell this story, but it was somebody, Mudassar was telling it the other day, and everybody knows Kareem. Everybody knows that they were walking the walk that they talked about being a mission-driven company. And they really were. They were very focused on their employees, job creation, changing whole cultures, and particularly the MENA ecosystem. And it was very high on their list. And Magnus and Mudassar and I went into a lot of conversations about it's too soon, we can have a bigger impact on the ecosystem if we don't exit now. And it took sort of me, third party, saying, you will have an amazing impact on the ecosystem if you exit now. And virtually every conversation that any of us have said the Kareem exit. And so they know now how important that was, and so the timing was right for them, and that doesn't, and thank God, I mean, the timing was right for the deal. The valuation is, stunning in hindsight, but it just shows that nuanced thinking that you have to be part of, and you have to be a coach on, and you can't simply say, hey, my fund is up, we got to exit. Because that's not going to create the right type of exits. Now back to the strategics. Yes, absolutely. That is, as we know, most financial investors view the presence of a strategic in a cap table as a negative. There's almost always the view that there's some special deal, or there'll be something less than arm's length, or that they want an in to buy that, or to compete. They're going to steal the IP and compete. So it's a rare strategic that has the true value add that overshadows the negatives. They exist. There are corporate venture funds that you would call strategics that have escaped that trap, whether that's Intel Ventures or maybe Qualcomm, a few others that are well known as financial investors. And the same is true of families, both, and let's call them just single vertical corporates. That is a tough road when they are aligned as strategic. If it's just great family money that's known to work for you or help you, that's a whole different story, and that's a positive. But I think people do tend to steer clear, and so you have to think about it when you put it in your cap table.
And I think that's an important learning, because I think families in the region, most of them, and including what we used to think about venture and direct investing as a family, would like to invest in things that they're familiar with and that they're comfortable with, and in industries that they're active in. And thereby that makes them strategic and actually hurts the founder in the long term as they try to raise more and more capital from pure financially driven institutions. So any last thoughts, because I know we're on 25 minutes and I want to leave one or two questions for the audience, on really how you think about exits in the region versus internationally. And all of you have, you've been looking east and here as well, and you've been looking across the world in emerging markets, as have you, Chris. So how are they different in the region, if they exist at all, and they do exist to some degree?
Yeah, I'll give the opposite view, which is there has been a lot of talk about there's not enough exits, and I think the reality is it will change. You look at these other ecosystems like Latin America, where you had Despegar, PagSeguro, you have companies like Mercado Libre that are worth a lot, and that took time to get there, right? And I think we all have to focus on those positive outcomes, really dig into the ecosystem, but that will happen. And that's just the way it'll work. But we have to be patient, nurture the talent, partner with these founders and their big ambitions, and be there when they need it.
I take it from a slightly different angle, in the sense of it's less about the region and somewhat more about the kind of the nature of the asset. I think that I would hope in the Middle East region and in some others, maybe Africa, we're going to see the capital markets skip a generation and not be so dependent on this kind of antiquated model of IPO, et cetera, and move into more to a more liquid market. I think we're already seeing that with companies staying private longer and more liquidity for private shares. Platforms like EquityZen and SharesPost, which are doing a lot of business and growing really, quite heavily or quite quickly. That will be, I think, the mid-phase where you start to have different forms of exits or liquidity, which can, even draw out the IPO process, kick it even further down the line. Plus, what I was saying about digital assets, it sounds like, spaceships and jetpacks, but mark my words, by 2020, 2021, you're going to see it to become very commonplace for companies to be issuing digital assets, which will create a whole new platform and will change the whole idea. If China can issue a cryptocurrency as its sovereign currency, which they're doing, you're going to see that happen to the capital markets, and everything that we're all doing in here is going to be sped up like X-fold.
Yeah, and so I would say one thing that it's great to talk about we need more exits. What we need are more successful companies. And successful companies find a way to get liquidity. The region and many emerging markets have not generated enough companies that deserve an exit. The metrics simply aren't there, or the moats to competition are not there, or the innovation is not there. And that is really where we all need to focus, and we collectively do focus. I think the more of those we can build, the happier we'll be with the number of exits. That's going to come, or liquidity. And I agree that we're using an outdated term, but we all mean the same thing.
Great. Thank you. I think we have time for one question from the audience. Yes. Okay, well, there's two. I think maybe we can, two questions.
Not so much a question, more to answer the question that you asked earlier.
Thank you, Philip.
So using my Magnet subscription, which I encourage you all to get one.
As
How much
do
does
I.
that cost?
Plug in for Magnet. Everyone should get a Magnet.
$7,000 a year.
Is there a discount for this?
That's discounted. It's $7,600, but I'll give it to you for $7,000. 2018 had 17 exits, of which 82% were regional acquirers, International with disclosed value of $100 million, whereas 2019 year to date has already had 23 exits, of which 60% were regional acquirers, 40% international, 3.6 billion in disclosed value, obviously 3.1 billion coming from the Careem exit. And there have been 2 IPOs. Fowry in Egypt was the first, and you can debate whether Network International is a startup or not, but that was listed in the London Stock Exchange as well. So,
so we've done better than our European counterparts. Thank you.
There we go.
Other question?
Hello, I do have a quick question, and it might be more appropriate for the team here. So we always talk about M&As as an exit for obvious reasons, at least for the Middle East. But I'm also curious, we'll not build an IPO market anytime soon, but what can we be doing for the next 5 years, 8 years, or 10 years, and build the IPO ecosystem here in the region? Because we don't want to be saying the same thing in 10 years, but sometimes because we only talk about M&A, and I don't know if regional regulatory bodies or any locals or any passionate regulators, lobbyists behind are actually fostering that IPO ecosystem. But also US and Europe and Asia, it took time. I don't know if we're actually building the blocks to make sure we have an IPO market here in the region, or do you think it's just not necessary?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I think you will have alternatives, and we're seeing them as discussed. But you'd be crazy not to move in parallel, and I think that's the kind of role that, sadly, I don't think I see anybody in this room that has a real role there. But that's where you have opportunity for, let's say, Bahrain or Abu Dhabi is being active to take a lead and say, we can enable that here because we've gotten rid of the regulatory underbrush. And that can be a great differentiator.
Jihan, I saw you nodding. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I totally agree.
Thank you.
Yeah, and also like direct listings, I think is...
Can you get Joel to say that? I agree. Or maybe Noor, that would be the really fun thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of complaints about the, the kind of state of venture capital, and obviously we haven't seen the types of, results in some of the recent, more public IPOs. But direct listings, I think, are kind of on the rise. There's a company, I think GTS, who's really kind of involved and pushing, and there's a lot of, kind of noise and a lot of discussion about, the benefits of direct listing. There's innovation. People are looking for more efficient, higher impact ways of kind of getting liquidity, whether it's an IPO, whether it's direct listing, whether it's a digital securitization, all of it. And all of these things will come together. And I think that it would be to the benefit of emerging markets that have a lot to gain by basically, kind of seizing that ground to just take it.
I agree. Last question.
Chris, actually, this is a question to you, and maybe piggybacking off of Shane's sort of comment on public markets here in the region.
I started shaving it when I was 40. Is
All
that your
right,
question?
Yeah. Do you think in hindsight, and obviously the Careem exit was phenomenal, but do you think in hindsight Careem could have been a candidate to stay private longer and potentially be an inaugural public sort of market tech IPO in the region and set the stage for more companies to come? Or do you think that, again, because of the timing pre-IPO of Uber, that this would have really been the best result for them?
Well, I'm not too interested in those hindsight type pieces of analysis. Knowing what I know, which is pretty in-depth about all of the factors at play, they made the right decision. Luckily, in hindsight, from a valuation perspective, because they're locked in at a $55 value a share, that they can put their shares to Uber at, their 3-point-whatever billion is intact, where it wouldn't be if they were either trying to raise money now in private or public markets where the big comps are sinking. And so, great idea and a great thing to do it now in hindsight. But yes, it could potentially have been that, but it could also have been a different kind of acquisition. It could have acquired, I mean, so the number of potential exits were many, varied, and all interesting, but I think they took the right path.
Great. Yes, well done.
Well, good question. You know, markets shift around, regulators get involved, but that's not my area of expertise. I was reading the same things you were, and then I stopped reading them, and I thought, well, I got other things to do. So we'll see what happens.
I think they're still working on it. You're talking about the long-term capital market? Yeah, they're still working on it.
And Facebook has a currency, and I mean, there's a lot of things that you read about, and it's maybe coming, maybe it won't come. I get it. We're all reading it. I'm not in charge of it, so I wish I could answer better. I got my 5X. I mean, there's some merit to that parallel exit strategy, but generally speaking, public markets are using a lot of very relevant data and analysis to come up with their valuation. And so the idea that somebody over here is going to avoid those thoughts and valuation metrics and be dramatically different from the public markets is probably a fallacy. That type of market mismatch doesn't last for long. So just another way of achieving exit is possible, but the idea that it will be at some inflated value that you're escaping public market scrutiny doesn't, long term, that doesn't really make sense if you think about it.
Yeah, I agree with Chris on that. It's like, you know, if the if it's supposed to be a hot potato game and you keep throwing it up, is that necessarily healthy for the ecosystem, the companies, the shareholders? You know, at some point there has to be some, you know, parity in the system, right?
But then WeWork might have IPO'd.
Oh, goody.
All right, so can we thank the panelists for a great panel?
Thank you, guys.
Okay, so for those of you watching us on live stream, we're going to be turning off the live stream now because in this session, this is off the record, so just in this room, an opportunity for all of, for us to continue the discussion. And then although this was supposed to be a 1-hour session, we're going to kind of cut it short because I think one of the venting issues will be everybody's hungry and everyone wants to have lunch. But, a lot of you were having discussions, so let's just open it up and maybe have, just an open discussion as to, what are the major pain points that you're having as investors, as VCs, and maybe learn from each other because you guys are all the experts in the room and this is the opportunity to have. So who's gonna open the floor? No one? Make sure the live stream is off. Okay, perfect. Oh, almost. Yeah. All right, so we have Oves who's gonna start.
So I think I'll just, I think raising, I joined the fund 18 months ago. We do emerging markets, Series A and B capital. Got some great colleagues.